The Duke's Falcon refused the hand of every lady in Yorkshire before it ever looked at the Maid. Alderwick Park had prepared for triumph that morning. By 10 o'clock, the south lawn glittered with polished boots, pale parasols, silver-topped canes, and the soft sweep of muslin and silk beneath a high June sky. The house party had been arranged with the precision of a military review, though no one would have been so vulgar as to call it that. There were titled guests from 3 counties, 2 visiting countesses, 1 elderly viscount who had brought his own field glass, and Lady Verity Harclay, daughter of the Marquis Harclay, who had dressed as if the falconry display were less a sport than a coronation. Her riding habit was the exact blue of a forget-me-not, her gloves were pearl grey, and her smile had the careful softness of a woman who expected to be watched. Everyone watched her. Everyone, that is, except His Grace, Alastair Vane, Duke of Westerdale, who stood near the falconer's post in a dark coat and a silence that made even compliments sound unnecessary. Mabel Fenwick stood far behind the line of guests with a folded stack of linen cloths balanced over one arm and a tray of fresh water glasses in the other. She was not meant to be noticed. She had been trained into invisibility by necessity, by service, and by the long, humiliating lesson that a woman who had fallen from gentility into labour must never remind her betters that she had once known how to read their books, speak their French, and understand their amusements. So she kept her eyes lowered. Mostly. The falcon made that impossible. Astra was hooded on the perch, a sleek, pale-breasted creature with slate wings and a stillness so complete it seemed carved rather than living. The gentlemen admired her breeding. The ladies admired her beauty. Mabel saw the tremor in one talon. She saw the little pull of discomfort where the leather jess crossed wrong against the bird's leg. She saw, too, the smallest dark nick along the edge of the strap, no wider than the head of a pin, but too clean to be wear. Her fingers tightened around the tray. "Miss Fenwick," whispered Elsie, the younger maid beside her, without turning her head. "You'll spill." Mabel loosened her grip at once. "Thank you. Don't look so hard. Mr. Pike will see." Mabel looked down. Across the lawn, Mr. Oswin Pike, the steward who had lately taken it upon himself to manage the mews as well as the accounts, was already glancing toward the servants as if suspicion were a habit he enjoyed wearing. Mabel stilled her face. She had learned that much from him. Never let a cruel man see where he has struck. A murmur passed through the guests as the Duke lifted one gloved hand. He did not perform for them. He simply waited, and because he waited, every voice softened. Even from 20 feet away, Mabel felt the effect of him. Power sat on him without ornament. He did not need the gold braid or easy laughter other gentlemen used to declare themselves important. His restraint did it for him. The head falconer removed Astra's hood. The bird blinked once at the light, then turned her sharp head toward the Duke. For a moment, all seemed as it should. Then Lady Verity stepped forward. "Your Grace," she said, her voice bright enough to carry. "You promised I might attempt the first call." The Duke's expression did not change, but the pause that followed was enough to make several guests glance at one another. "I promised you might offer your hand, Lady Verity." Her smile flickered, then warmed again. "Then I shall try not to disappoint her." "A falcon is rarely disappointed," he said. "Only accurate." A few gentlemen laughed softly. Lady Verity did not. She extended her pearl grey glove, the picture of graceful confidence. The falconer gave the signal. Astra opened her wings. Every face turned upward. She rose from the perch in one clean sweep, crossed the few yards toward Lady Verity, and at the final moment twisted away as if the offered hand had turned to smoke. A gasp rippled through the lawn. Astra circled once and returned to the top of the post, where she settled with a hard, offended snap of her wings. Colour touched Lady Verity's cheeks. "Perhaps she is shy." The Duke looked at the bird, not at her. "She is not." The second attempt belonged to Lady Northam's niece, a girl with golden curls and nervous ambition. Astra refused her before the falconer had finished signalling. The third was a young countess who had hunted in Scotland and spoke confidently of birds she had never handled. Astra rose, dipped, and returned to the post. By then the amusement had curdled into embarrassment. Fans slowed. Smiles sharpened. People began to search for someone to blame. Mabel saw the jess pull again, and the falcon's talon flexed in pain. Not terrible pain. Not injury that would show to those who did not care to see. But enough. Enough to make a proud creature mistrust the hands calling her. Something is wrong, Mabel breathed. Else's eyes widened. Hush. Mabel did. She pressed her lips together until the words became silence. The head falconer, a thin man too anxious to contradict Pike, wiped his brow. Mr. Pike moved closer to the perch and muttered something under his breath. The Duke heard it. Mabel saw his head turn slightly. Not much. Only enough to prove he missed very little. Again, Pike said, louder now. With Lady Verity, if your grace permits. The bird is being difficult. The Duke's gaze cooled. Astra is not difficult. She is communicating. The words passed through Mabel like the first warmth from a winter hearth. It was a foolish reaction. Dangerous, too. Men of rank often said fair things when fairness cost them nothing. But still, she heard it. So did Astra, it seemed. The falcon turned her pale eye toward the Duke, then toward the line of servants standing far behind the guests. Mabel froze. It was impossible. Birds did not look through a crowd like that. They did not fix on a person who had not called them. They did not choose a maid in a plain grey dress with sleeves scrubbed thin at the wrists. Lady Verity noticed the direction of the bird's attention and followed it with a glance. Her eyes landed on Mabel. A smile appeared, small and cruel. Perhaps one of the servants is distracting her. The lawn went quiet in that delicate way upper society had, where no one admitted to listening and everyone listened. Mabel lowered her eyes at once. He climbed the back of her neck. The tray grew heavy. She felt Pike stare before he spoke. Fenwick. The name struck the air harder than it needed to. Several older guests shifted. One or two seemed to remember something, though perhaps not enough to know what. The Duke looked at her fully then. Mabel curtsied as well as she could with the tray in her hands. Your Grace. Her voice was steady. She thanked God for that small mercy. Have you interfered with the bird? Pike demanded. No, sir. Have you made some sound? No, sir. Have you handled anything from the mews? Mabel felt the old wound open under the question, silent and familiar. Her father's glove lay hidden in the pocket beneath her apron, folded flat against her side as if memory could be made small enough to survive. No, sir, she said again. Lady Verity's smile widened. How curious. She watches as if she knows better than everyone present. A few ladies gave soft laughs. Mabel did not move. She had endured laughter before. Laughter was safer than pity. Pity came closer. The Duke's voice cut across the lawn with quiet authority. Does she? The laughter stopped. Lady Verity blinked. Your Grace? You said she watches as if she knows better. I asked whether she does. It was not a defense. Not quite. But it was not an accusation either, and that made it more startling than kindness. Mabel dared one glance up. The Duke was still watching her, not with warmth, not with flirtation, not with the idle curiosity gentlemen sometimes gave pretty maids when no chaperone stood near. His gaze was exact. It asked what she had seen. It did not ask what she was worth. Mabel swallowed. The right answer was nothing. A maid's safety often lived inside that word. Nothing, Your Grace. I saw nothing. I know nothing. I am nothing. Then Astra shifted on the perch and gave one low, sharp cry. The wrongness in the jest pulled again. Mabel's restraint cracked. The strap is twisted, Your Grace. The words were not loud, but they carried. Gasp stirred the lawn. Pike's face darkened. You will hold your tongue. Let her finish, the Duke said. Mabel's heart struck once, hard. She curtsied again, because fear had manners even when courage did not. Forgive me, Your Grace. The right jess is turned beneath the ring. It is rubbing when she rises. There is also a cut along the leather. She is not refusing their hands out of temper. She is refusing because flight hurts her before she can trust where she will land. Silence followed. Not ordinary silence. The kind that changes the shape of a morning. The Duke looked from Mabel to the Falcon. The Falcon looked back at him, fierce and offended and waiting. Lady Verity gave a small laugh that did not sound amused. How remarkable! A housemaid who speaks Falcon now. Mabel lowered her eyes, but before shame could settle, the Duke turned to Pike. Examine the Jess. Pike hesitated. That hesitation was brief, almost invisible. But Mabel saw it. So did the Duke. The head falconer stepped forward instead, fingers careful, and lifted the leather. His face changed. Your Grace, he said quietly, the girl is correct. A murmur moved through the guests, this time with a different taste to it. Surprise. Discomfort. The beginning of doubt. Lady Verity's fan opened with a snap. Mabel's pulse thundered in her ears. She had spoken out of turn. She had corrected men before titled witnesses. She had placed herself where no maid survived for long, in the center of a truth inconvenient to pride. Astra gave another cry, spread her wings, and launched from the perch. Someone screamed softly. The tray slipped in Mabel's hands. Silver-edged glasses chimed against one another. The falcon did not fly toward Lady Verity. She did not fly toward the falconer. She did not fly toward the Duke. She cut through the bright morning air above the lawn, past feathers, parasols, lifted hands, and startled faces, straight toward the servant standing where society had placed them, at the edge of notice. Straight toward Mabel. For one impossible second, no one moved. The falcon cut through the sunlit air with her wings drawn tight, and the lawn seemed to shrink around Mabel until there was nothing in the world but the rush of feathers and the weight of every eye turning toward her. A lady cried out. A gentleman stepped back. Elsie whispered Mabel's name as if it were a warning. The tray slipped before Mabel knew she had loosened her grip. Glasses struck the grass with bright, brittle music. Water splashed across her shoes. She should have curtsied. She should have lowered herself. She should have made herself smaller than fear. Instead, the old knowledge in her body answered before the servant in her could refuse. Her right hand went beneath her apron, found the folded leather hidden against her side, and pulled free the cracked falconer's glove she had carried for 8 years like a sin. It was too large for her. The seams were worn pale. One cuff had split near the stitching. Yet the moment she thrust it up, palm steady and elbow locked, Astra changed. The falcon flared her wings 6 feet from Mabel's face, slowed with astonishing grace, and came down upon the old glove as if she had been expected there all along. The weight struck Mabel's arm. Not hard. Not cruelly. Living weight. Trusting weight. Mabel bent her knees to absorb it and lifted her left hand near the Jess without touching too quickly. Astra settled, talons firm on leather, head high, pale eyes bright with offense and relief. The lawn went silent. Not polite silent. Not listening silent. The silence after a rule has broken so completely that no one knows what punishment should follow. Mabel heard her own breathing. She heard the faint creak of old glove leather. She heard Lady Verity's fan close. Good heaven, someone murmured. She landed on the Maid. Mabel did not look up. If she looked up, she might see their faces. If she saw their faces, she might remember she had just stepped beyond every boundary that kept a woman like her employed, fed, and invisible. Fenwick, Mr. Pike said. His voice had gone flat with anger. Astra's head snapped toward him. Mabel felt the bird tense through the glove. Easy, she whispered, so softly no one should have heard. There now. I've got you. The words were old. Her father's words. They rose from a locked room inside her and crossed her lips before grief could stop them. Astra lowered one wing a fraction and settled again. That small obedience caused a new ripple through the guests. Lady Verity took one step forward, her smile sharpened by humiliation. Your Grace, surely this is intolerable. The girl has made a spectacle of herself. Mabel's stomach tightened. She kept her arm steady. I beg your pardon, my lady. Do you? Verity asked. Because it seems to me you were prepared. Her gaze dropped to the glove. A servant does not happen to carry such a thing by accident. Several eyes followed. Mabel felt the old leather become heavier than Astra herself. She had mended stockings with it hidden beneath her pillow. She had slept with it nearby when servants whispered about her father. She had told herself it was only a relic, only a thing no one else wanted. Now it looked like evidence. Mr. Pike moved toward her. "Give me that glove." Astra clicked her beak. Mabel did not retreat, but the instinct passed through her all the same. A maid did not refuse a steward. A ruined man's daughter did not refuse anyone twice. Then the Duke spoke. "Stop where you are, Pike." The command did not rise. It did not need to. Pike halted. The guests halted with him. Even the head falconer froze with one hand halfway lifted. The Duke crossed the lawn at an unhurried pace, which somehow made the moment more dangerous. His eyes were on Astra first, then on Mabel's arm, then on the glove. He came close enough to see the stitching, but not close enough to crowd the bird. Mabel noticed that. Against all reason, she noticed it. A careless man would have reached for what belonged to him. A vain one would have reclaimed the falcon before the guests could laugh again. This man stopped at a distance that allowed Astra to remain calm. "Do not lower your arm," he said to Mabel. The order was quiet. "She has chosen a perch. Let her trust it." Mabel swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Verity gave a soft laugh. "Chosen? Your Grace is generous. I should say she was trained." The Duke did not look at her. "By whom?" "By the girl, evidently. A housemaid with access to my falcon often enough to train her would suggest a failure in my household, Lady Verity. Is that the accusation you wish to make in front of my steward?" Verity's color changed. Pike's mouth tightened. Mabel stared at the grass and felt the strange, impossible shape of protection settle around her. It was not warmth. Not yet. It was a wall. "I only mean," Verity said, "that insolence often dresses itself as innocence." "And fear often dresses itself as accusation," the Duke replied. This time, no one laughed. Mabel's arm began to ache. She did not let it tremble. The old glove had been made for a man's hand and a stronger wrist. Astra weighed perhaps 2 pounds, no more, but 2 pounds could become a mountain when 100 people waited for weakness. The Duke noticed. "Mr. Hale," he said to the head falconer, "bring the perch closer." Slowly. The man obeyed. Astra watched him but did not startle. Mabel murmured once more, nonsense and comfort under her breath, the way Thomas Fenwick had taught her when she was small enough to stand on an overturned bucket in the mews. "That's it," she whispered. "Don't mind them. They're only loud because they're frightened." The Duke's eyes lifted to her face. For the first time, Mabel realized he had heard. Heat rose to her cheeks. Astra stepped from the glove to the offered perch with reluctant dignity. Only when the bird was settled did Mabel lower her aching arm. She folded the glove instinctively, trying to hide it against her skirt. "No," the Duke said. Mabel went still. "Let me see it." Her fingers closed around the leather. Every lesson in obedience told her to hand it over. Every daughterly wound in her refused. "Your Grace, it is only an old glove." "Then it will not suffer from being seen." His voice remained even, but something in it had changed. It was not suspicion. It was interest, sharpened into purpose. Mabel placed the glove across her palms and held it out. She did not release it. The Duke looked down. The cracked cuff had fallen open. Inside, where the lining had worn thin, 2 letters remained in dark thread. TF. The Duke's face did not alter, yet his silence deepened. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Mabel could feel Pike behind her without turning. She could feel Verity waiting for any answer that could be twisted into shame. "It belonged to my father, Your Grace." "His name?" "Thomas Fenwick." The head falconer drew a small breath. Pike spoke too quickly. "A disgraced former servant, Your Grace. Gone many years." Mabel felt the word strike, but she kept her chin level. Her father had taught birds to return across open sky. She could survive one more insult on a lawn. The Duke's gaze moved from Pike back to Mabel. Who taught you to hold a falcon without fear? She answered before she could make the reply safer. A man this house preferred to forget. The words hung there. They were too bold. Too true. Elsie looked as though she might faint on Mabel's behalf. Lady Verity's lips parted in satisfaction, as if she had just witnessed Mabel dig her own grave with perfect manners. The Duke did not rebuke her. That was worse, somehow. He studied her as if a hidden door had opened where he expected a wall. "Did you handle Ostra before this morning?" he asked. "No, Your Grace." "Did you damage the Jess?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you know it was damaged before she flew?" Mabel hesitated. Truth was a blade. Silence was a cage. "I saw it when she shifted on the perch." Pike gave a contemptuous sound. "She expects Your Grace to believe she observed what trained men missed." The Duke finally turned to him. "I believe trained men sometimes miss what they are paid not to notice." Pike's face went still. It lasted only a second, but Mabel saw it. So did the Duke. Lady Verity stepped between the silence and its consequence with practiced grace. "Your Grace, surely the guests need not be troubled by household irregularities. The girl should be sent below, and we may continue when the bird is properly managed." The Duke looked toward Ostra. The falcon had settled, but her head remained angled toward Mabel. The truth of that small allegiance was visible to every person on the lawn. "No," he said. "The display is concluded." A wave of disappointment and curiosity passed through the guests. "Mr. Pike, you will not question Miss Fenwick again without my permission. Mr. Hale, you will bring Ostra to the mews and examine every strap, ring, and hood in my presence." He paused. "Miss Fenwick will come as well." Mabel's breath caught. Pike took a step forward. "Your Grace, that is hardly suitable. My mother will attend." The Duke's tone made the objection vanish. "That should satisfy propriety, unless you believe the Duchess Dowager insufficiently respectable." A few eyes turned toward Pike with sudden interest. He bowed. "Of course not, Your Grace." The Duke looked back at Mabel. "Bring the glove." It was not a request. It was not a punishment either. Mabel curtsied, the old leather pressed between her hands. "Yes, Your Grace." As the guests began to murmur and shift toward the terrace, Mabel remained where she was for one final heartbeat. Water darkened the grass around her shoes. Broken sunlight glinted on the fallen glasses. Lady Verity watched her as if the morning had become personal. The Duke had already turned toward the mews, but after 3 steps he looked back, not at the falcon, not at the guests, but at Mabel. Waiting. That was when she understood the true danger had only begun. Not because she had been accused. She was used to accusation. Not because a lady hated her. She was used to being disliked by those who required servants but resented seeing faces on them. The danger was that His Grace had seen something. And men like the Duke of Westerdale did not look away once they had begun to see. The walk to the mews felt longer than any corridor Mabel had crossed in service. It was only a few hundred feet from the south lawn to the low stone buildings beyond the stable yard, but every step seemed to carry her farther from the safe obscurity of folded linen, scrubbed floors, and lowered eyes. Behind her, the guests drifted back toward the terrace in bright clusters of curiosity. Ahead of her, the Duke walked with the same composed stride he had used on the lawn, as if scandal were something he permitted only at a distance. Ostra travelled before them on the portable perch, hooded again but restless beneath the falconer's careful hand. Mr. Pike followed close enough for Mabel to hear his breathing. That was deliberate. Men like Pike enjoyed reminding people they stood behind them. The Duchess Dowager joined them at the stable arch, summoned with such speed that Mabel suspected very little happened at Alderwick Park without the old lady knowing before the bell finished ringing. She was tall, spare, and dressed in black silk with a lace cap so severe it seemed capable of judging a person by itself. Her eyes passed over Pike, the falconer, the Duke, and last of all Mabel. They did not soften. They did not dismiss her either. "Alastair," she said, "I am told your morning's entertainment has become educational." "That depends upon who has been learning, mother." "Then let us hope it is not wasted on the stupid." Pike bowed. "Your Grace, I assure you, the matter is quite simple. Matters declared simple by anxious men rarely are, the Duchess Dowager replied. Proceed. The mews smelled of clean straw, leather, oil, and the sharp wild scent of birds. Mabel had not stood inside it since childhood, not truly. She had passed the outer wall with buckets and baskets. She had seen the roofline from the laundry yard. But the threshold itself had become forbidden after her father's disgrace, as though stone could remember scandal and reject the blood of the accused. The moment she stepped inside, grief rose with such force that she nearly forgot to breathe. Thomas Fenwick had once stood beneath these rafters with a whistle between his teeth and sunlight on his sleeves. He had taught her that birds dislike noise without purpose, hands without patience, and men who confuse domination with command. He had died with half the county believing he had lost the Duke's finest Falcon through carelessness, greed, or drink, depending on which version of gossip suited the listener. Mabel knew only this: he had left home one morning with clean hands and returned with his name ruined. Miss Fenwick. The Duke's voice drew her back. She looked up at once. Your Grace. He stood near a work table where Austra's perch had been set. The head falconer, Mr. Hale, waited with his cap in both hands. Pike hovered near a cabinet of hoods and jesses, his face arranged into injured dignity. The Duchess Dowager seated herself on a plain wooden chair as if it were a throne. The glove, the Duke said. Mabel held it tighter before she could stop herself. Your Grace, it is mine. I did not ask whether it was yours. His gaze remained steady. I asked to see it. The distinction should not have comforted her, but it did. She placed the cracked glove on the table, careful not to smooth the worn cuff where the letters were sewn. T.F. The Duke lowered his eyes to the stitching. He did not touch it at first. That restraint unsettled her more than possession would have. Thomas Fenwick, he said. Pike gave a soft cough. As I said, Your Grace, a former servant. A talented enough fellow in his day, no one denies that. But unreliable near the end. Mabel's hands went cold. The Duchess Dowager's head turned slightly. Unreliable in what fashion, Mr. Pike? Pike bowed again, though not as deeply. There was an incident with one of the late Duke's birds. A valuable gerfalcon vanished during a training flight. Fenwick was responsible. The loss was never properly accounted for. That is a careful phrase, the Duke said. Careful phrases often hide careless facts. Pike's jaw tightened. Your Grace, I served your father loyally. I would not speak ill of the dead if truth did not require it. Mabel felt the words scrape across her skin. She had heard them before in the servants' hall, behind pantry doors, in the village shop when someone saw her buying thread. Truth required it. Respectability required it. 100 cruelties in England had hidden behind those two phrases. Miss Fenwick, the Duke said, what do you know of that incident? Mabel lifted her chin. Only what a daughter was allowed to know, Your Grace. My father returned late. He had mud on his boots and no blood on his hands. He said the bird did not vanish by accident. By morning, he had been dismissed. Pike made a sharp sound. A child's memory. Yes, Mabel said quietly. But still mine. The Duchess Dowager's eyes moved to her with the faintest spark of approval. The Duke reached for the damaged jess now lying beside Austra's perch. He lifted it toward the light. Mr. Hale, your opinion. The falconer swallowed. The leather has been cut, Your Grace. Not torn by where? With what? A thin blade, I should think. When? Hale hesitated. Before the display. I cannot say how long before. The Duke looked at Pike. Who had access to Austra's equipment this morning? Mr. Hale, the stable boy will, and myself, Pike answered. Also any servant passing near the outer room, if they were bold enough. His eye slid toward Mabel. Miss Fenwick was not passing near the outer room, the Duke said. She was on the lawn with water glasses when I first saw her. Pike bowed. As Your Grace says. No. As I observed. The correction landed softly, but Pike flushed. Mabel lowered her eyes, not because she wished to hide, but because something dangerous had moved in her chest. Not hope. Hope was too costly. It was a smaller thing. The relief of being measured by what had happened, not by what people expected from her station. The Duke set down the gess and finally touched the glove. His fingers turned back the cuff. "Why did you carry this today?" Mabel had prepared no answer that would not shame her. "Because it was my father's." "That does not explain why it was in your apron at a falconry display." She looked at Ustra, still beneath the hood, still breathing with offended dignity. "I knew there would be birds, Your Grace." Pike gave a laugh under his breath. "Sentimental nonsense." The Duke did not look away from Mabel. "Finish." She drew a slow breath. "When I was a child, my father told me a frightened bird can make a proud room look foolish. I did not expect to touch Ustra. I would not have dared. But I thought, if something went wrong, I might at least remember what he taught me. And something went wrong." "Yes, Your Grace." "Because of the gess." "Partly." The word escaped before caution caught it. The Duke heard the difference at once. "Partly?" Mabel felt Pike's stare sharpen. She should retreat. She could still say she meant nothing. Instead, she looked at the Duke's hands on the table, near her father's glove but not claiming it. Ustra was not only uncomfortable. She was wary of the hands offered to her. Why? The hands were eager. The Duchess Dowager gave a dry sound that might have been amusement. Mabel continued before courage failed. "Falcons do not trust eagerness. They trust steadiness." Lady Verity's glove smelled strongly of rose oil. Another lady trembled. The young countess lifted too quickly. But even before that, Ustra had learned the morning was unsafe. Learned from what? The Duke asked. From the pain in the strap. Perhaps from something else. I heard nothing clearly on the lawn, but she startled before she should have. Pike stepped forward. "Your Grace, surely we are not to conduct an inquiry based on a maid's interpretation of a bird's feelings." Ustra shifted beneath her hood and gave one low note. The Duchess Dowager looked at Pike. "The bird appears to prefer the maid's interpretation to yours." Hale bit his lip and looked down. Mabel almost smiled. She did not. A maid's smile at a steward's expense was a luxury she could not afford. Pike's gaze dropped to the glove again. In any case, that item should be returned to the estate. Fenwick was in service when it was issued. It is House Vane property. Mabel's fingers curled at her sides. The Duke rested one hand lightly on the glove. "Can you prove that?" "It bears initials, Your Grace." "His initials?" "He worked here. Many men work here. Their hands do not become mine because they serve under my roof." The word struck Mabel harder than she expected. She looked up. For one unguarded second, the Duke was looking back. No warmth yet. No tenderness. Only justice, cold and clean as water drawn from a deep well. It was enough to make her breath unsteady. Pike recovered quickly. "Your Grace, I only caution against allowing old disgrace to dress itself in romance." Thomas Fenwick was dismissed for cause. His daughter may have inherited his skill, but skill and honesty are not the same thing. Mabel went still. The mew seemed to narrow around her. She had expected insult to herself. She had not expected her father to be killed again in front of her with such polished ease. "Mr. Pike," the Duke said, "you will not speak of inheritance in Miss Fenwick's character as though disgrace were blood." Pike bowed, but there was anger under it. "I meant no offense." "Then mean more carefully." Silence settled. The Duchess Dowager rose. "Alastair, the guests will be waiting for some explanation." "They may wait." "Good. It will improve them." She turned toward Mabel. "Miss Fenwick, you will remain available to answer His Grace's questions. You will not be punished for obeying his instruction. Do you understand?" Mabel curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." The old lady's gaze flickered to the glove. "And keep your father's property where you can find it." Mabel's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Grace." Outside the half-open mew's door, silk whispered against stone. Mabel turned only slightly, but she saw a flash of forget-me-not blue vanish beyond the wall. Lady Verity had not returned to the terrace. She had heard enough. Perhaps not all. Enough was worse. The Duke saw Mabel's glance and followed it to the doorway. His face changed by less than a breath. "Mr. Hale, lock the equipment cabinet. Pike, no item from this room is to be moved without my permission." "Of course, Your Grace." "Miss Fenwick," the Duke said, and when she looked back, his eyes were on the glove, the Jess, and then her face. "This morning has raised questions. I intend to answer them." Mabel curtsied because she had no safer way to stand beneath that promise. "I hope they are kind to the dead, Your Grace." "I am less concerned with kindness," he said. "I prefer accuracy." For the first time since childhood, Mabel stood in the Westerdale mews and felt the old lie beneath her father's name shift, not break, not yet, but shift like a stone under pressure. Outside, Lady Verity was already carrying what she had heard back toward the house. And Mabel knew, with a cold certainty born from years below stairs, that by dinner the truth would not be the only story fighting to survive. By the time Mabel returned below stairs, the story had already arrived ahead of her wearing a better dress. In the servants' hall, it had become known that she had stepped from her place before half the county, called herself wiser than the falconers, and held the Duke's bird upon an old glove as if she had been born to command it. No one said this directly at first. That would have been kinder. Instead, the room changed when she entered. Spoons paused above bowls. A footman who had been laughing over cold beef lowered his eyes too quickly. The scullery maid stared at Mabel's apron as though expecting stolen feathers to fall from it. Only Elsie looked relieved, and even her relief was frightened. Mrs. Brindle, the housekeeper, stood near the long table with her account book under one arm and the rigid expression of a woman who had spent 30 years keeping noble disasters from staining domestic order. "Miss Fenwick," she said, and the use of Miss made two maids exchange glances. "You will take your meal later." Mabel had expected it. Hunger was easier to endure than scrutiny. "Yes, Mrs. Brindle. And you will remember that a servant may be summoned by His Grace without becoming a person of consequence." "I know that very well." The words were calm. Perhaps too calm. Mrs. Brindle's eyes narrowed. "Do you?" Mabel folded her hands before her. The cracked glove was no longer in her apron. The Duke had returned it to her in the mews, wrapped in a clean cloth by his own order, and she had hidden it in the narrow drawer beside her cot. It felt less like safety there than a candle left burning in a room full of dry curtains. "I know I am employed to serve, Mrs. Brindle. I did not seek notice. Notice finds those who invite it." Across the table, a kitchen maid whispered, "A falcon doesn't land on a girl for nothing." Someone else breathed, "Maybe she's been creeping into the mews at night." Elsie flushed. "She hasn't." Mrs. Brindle shut the account book with a sharp clap. "Enough. This house has guests. Guests require clean linen, polished silver, and quiet servants. They do not require gossip from below stairs to season their soup." Her gaze returned to Mabel. "You will keep away from the mews unless His Grace sends for you. You will not answer questions from guests. You will not speak of your father. Above all, you will not imagine that one strange morning has changed the distance between this hall and the drawing-room." Mabel lowered her eyes. "I have no wish to mistake the distance." That was true. She had measured it every day with aching feet. It was the distance between a tray carried and a tray received, between a name spoken and a name ordered, between silk that rustled and cotton that must be washed before dawn. Yet the morning had changed something. Not the distance, perhaps. Only the light falling across it. Mrs. Brindle dismissed her to the back passage with a nod. Mabel took the opportunity gladly, carrying a basket of fresh clods toward the stable yard. She needed air that did not taste of suspicion. The yard was quieter than the lawn had been, though not peaceful. Grooms crossed with buckets. A carriage horse stamped in its stall. Near the pump, Will, the stable boy, sat on an overturned pail with one hand wrapped clumsily in a rag. He tried to hide it when he saw her. "It's nothing," he said at once. "I didn't say it was anything." "Then don't look like that." He was 13, all elbows and pride, with a smudge of oats on his cheek. Mabel set down her basket. "Show me. Mrs. Brindle will have my ears if I stop." Mrs. Brindle has only 2 hands, and both are busy with mine at present. He smiled despite himself and held out his hand. The skin was reddened where a leather strap had burned across his palm. Not serious, but painful. Mabel took a clean strip from the basket and dipped it beneath the pump. Who gave you this? No one gave it. I was pulling a girth. Slipped. You should wrap it properly. Mister. Pike says lads who whimper don't keep places in good houses. Mabel's fingers stilled. Then she wrapped the cloth with careful firmness. Mr. Pike says many things that sound stronger than they are. Will glanced toward the mews. Is it true Ustra came to you? Everyone saw it. I didn't. I was sent to fetch saddle soap. He sounded cheated by fate. Was she heavy? Less than a loaf of bread. More than a secret. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will when you are older. She tied off the cloth. Do not let the knot stay wet. Change it before supper. You sound like your father. The words fell between them before he seemed to realize what he had said. His face went pale. I didn't mean, it is all right. My DA said Mr. Fenwick once flew a bird from the far ridge and called it back without meat. Just voice. He said no one could do that after him. Mabel looked toward the mew's roof. The slate shone under the afternoon light. Your father remembers generously. He says Mr. Pike didn't like him. That made Mabel look back. Will's eyes widened as if he had stepped into a room he had been warned not to enter. Before she could ask more, the sound of carriage wheels and bright voices drifted from the upper drive. Guests were returning from their delayed promenade, and the house was gathering itself for the next performance. Mabel lifted the basket. Go back to your work. And keep that hand clean. Miss Fenwick. The title sounded awkward in his mouth, but sincere. Do you think His Grace will find out what happened? Mabel almost said no. It would have been safer for them both. Instead, she thought of the Duke's hand resting near her father's glove without claiming it. I think His Grace dislikes being deceived. Will grinned. Then Mr. Pike should hide under a hay cart. Mabel gave him the smallest look of warning, and he ducked away, still grinning. The brief warmth left her as soon as she entered the side passage near the morning room. Voices floated through the half-open door, polished and dangerous. She should have turned back. Servants survived by not hearing what was not meant for them. But her name came through the opening in Lady Verity's voice, and Mabel stopped as if caught by a pin. The trouble, Your Grace, is not merely that the girl spoke out of turn. It is that she has been encouraged to believe her performance was useful. The Duchess Dowager answered before the Duke could. It was useful. The falconer confirmed her observation. A lucky guess, Verity said lightly. Servants often possess a kind of animal cunning. One must not mistake it for judgment. There was a pause. Mabel held the basket against her ribs and stared at the floorboards. Then the Duke spoke. You will call her Miss Fenwick when discussing my inquiry. Verity's laugh was gentle enough for embroidery and sharp enough for glass. Surely Your Grace does not mean to elevate a maid because a bird landed on her. I mean to prevent careless speech from becoming accepted fact. Then I am corrected. The words were gracious. The tone was not. Miss Fenwick, then. Still, for her own sake, the matter should be put to rest. People will talk. They already are. People often talk because thinking would fatigue them, the Duchess Dowager said. Mother. The Duke's warning held more patience than rebuke. Verity softened her voice. I am only concerned for the household. If there is uncertainty about Ustra, perhaps a second display would settle it. A brief one. Properly managed. I could offer my glove again, and if the bird behaves as she should, the morning becomes nothing more than a servant's overexcitement. Mabel felt the trap form as clearly as if Verity had laid it across the passage with silk ribbon. A second display. More guests. More eyes. Another chance to make Ustra perform until pain or fear became proof against the one person who had named it. And if Ustra refuses you again, the Duke asked. Then perhaps we shall discover whether Miss Fenwick has some secret influence over her? Mabel's breath caught. In the room, no one spoke for several seconds. "You are eager to test a theory that insults my house, my falconer, and my judgment," the Duke said at last. "I'm eager to protect you from ridicule. Ridicule rarely survives accuracy. Neither does reputation, once servants begin to think themselves indispensable." The Duchess Dowager's cane tapped once. How fortunate, then, that the aristocracy has never suffered from that delusion. Mabel nearly forgot herself and smiled. It vanished when footsteps moved toward the door. She slipped around the corner into the narrow passage by the linen press, heart beating hard. The door opened. Lady Verity stepped out with a rustle of blue skirts and paused near the very place Mabel had been standing. Another woman joined her, Lady Northam by the voice, breathless with curiosity. "Will he permit it?" Lady Northam whispered. "He will," Verity said. "His pride will not allow uncertainty to remain." "And the maid?" "Will learn that a bird's mistake is not destiny." Mabel stayed still behind the linen press, basket in her arms, every muscle locked. Verity's voice lowered, losing its sweetness. "By tomorrow, even his grace will know what sort of creature she is." The two ladies moved away, their slippers whispering over the passage runner. Mabel waited until the sound faded. Only then did she look down and notice a small black smear on the top cloth in her basket, transferred from the strip she had picked up near the stable pump. Wax! Dark, hard, and faintly scented beneath the leather oil. It matched the residue she had seen on Ustra's Jess. Mabel closed her fingers around the cloth. Somewhere beyond the wall, a falcon cried once from the mews. It sounded less like a warning than a summons. By the next morning, Alderwick Park had learned how to pretend nothing unusual had happened. That was one of the great arts of noble houses. Silver appeared polished, stair carpets lay brushed, ladies descended with soft voices and deliberate smiles, and gentlemen spoke of the weather as if no falcon had disgraced them, no maid had corrected them, and no old name had risen from the mews like a ghost. Mabel moved among the preparations with a clean apron and a careful face. She had slept little. The strip of cloth marked with black wax lay hidden beneath the loose board near her cot, wrapped inside a handkerchief. She had considered taking it to the Duke at once. She had also considered the cost of being wrong. A maid who accused a ladies' party, or a steward, or some unseen hand inside the Duke's own household did not merely risk dismissal. She risked being named unstable, ambitious, ungrateful. So she watched. She listened. She carried folded napkins through the servants' passage and heard Mrs. Brindle instruct the footman that the second display would be brief, respectable, and entirely free of gossip. That alone told Mabel gossip had won. By 11 o'clock, the south lawn had been arranged again. The chairs sat in a wider half-circle. The guests were more numerous, not fewer. Word had spread through the house party, and curiosity, once dressed properly, could pass as concern. Lady Verity stood near the front in a new pair of gloves, pale as milk, the cuffs embroidered with blue and silver thread. Mabel noticed the thread at once. It was not proof. It was not even accusation. Yet it drew her eye with the same quiet insistence as the black wax. The Duke stood several yards from Lady Verity, speaking with Mr. Hale beside Ustra's perch. His face was controlled, but Mabel saw the difference from yesterday. He was not merely hosting now. He was measuring. Mr. Pike stood near the equipment table with a smile too composed for a man whose muse had been questioned. Mabel took her place with the other servants at the edge of the lawn. She carried no tray this time. Mrs. Brindle had seen to that. Empty hands gave a servant fewer opportunities to become memorable. In the pocket beneath Mabel's apron, the cracked glove rested where it always did. She had told herself not to touch it. She touched it once anyway. "You should have said you were ill," Elsie whispered beside her. "And miss my own hanging," Mabel murmured. Elsie's eyes went wide. "Don't say such things. Then pray the company has better manners than a crowd." "They don't." That almost made Mabel smile. It faded when Lady Verity stepped forward. "Your Grace," she called softly, though soft words carried well when everyone wished to hear them. "I am ready whenever Ustra is." The Duke looked toward the falcon. "That remains to be seen." A small discomfort passed through the guests. Lady Verity's smile held. Of course. One must never rush trust. Mabel felt the hypocrisy like a cold draft. Astra stood hooded, but even from 20 feet away Mabel saw the tension in the bird's body. The right jess had been replaced. The strap lay correctly now. Mr. Hale had done his work with anxious care. Yet Astra did not rest as she should have. Her weight shifted. Her head angled beneath the hood. Something in the morning still troubled her. Mr. Pike, the Duke said, who has handled the equipment since yesterday? Only Mr. Hale and myself, Your Grace. The cabinet has remained locked. With whose key? Mine, Your Grace. And Mr. Hale's. The Duke said nothing, but the silence after the answer had teeth. Mr. Hale lifted the hood. Astra blinked at the light. Her pale eye moved across the lawn, over the ladies, over the gentlemen, over the servants, and settled nowhere. Lady Verity extended her beautiful glove. The embroidered cuff shone. Come then, proud girl, she said, sweet as sugared fruit. Let's be friends today. The falconer gave the signal. Astra opened her wings and rose. For one breath, the crowd believed the matter would be repaired. Astra flew toward Lady Verity, straight and clean. Verity's face softened into triumph. Then, 3 feet from her glove, Astra flinched midair as if struck by memory. She veered aside, beating hard, and climbed too quickly. The lawn stirred. Verity's arm lowered a fraction. Her smile froze. Mabel heard it then. Not clearly. Not loudly. A thin note, high and unnatural, so brief that most people would fold it into the cry of a bird or the squeak of leather. But Astra heard it. She turned sharply above the lawn, wings uneven with alarm. Mabel's eye searched the men near the equipment table. Mr. Pike stood very still with one hand near his waistcoat pocket. The Duke's gaze moved in the same direction. He had heard something too, or seen the bird answer it. Again, Pike said, "She is only unsettled from yesterday." The Duke did not turn. I gave no instruction for a second call. Forgive me, Your Grace. I only meant that Lady Verity should not be blamed for the creature's temper. Astra does not possess temper for your convenience. Lady Verity gave a light laugh. Your Grace, let us not make too much of a bird's mood. I am not afraid. She lifted her glove again, higher this time. Astra. The whistle came again. Mabel could not prove it. She could only feel the sound pass through the bird before anyone else understood. Astra dropped suddenly, not toward Verity's glove, but toward the open space before her. Verity gasped and stepped back. The movement was dramatic, not necessary, but the guests saw fear and believed it. Astra swept low, wings beating the air near Verity's shoulder, then turned in distress. A lady cried out. A gentleman reached for his cane as if a cane had ever solved a falcon. Mr. Hale went pale. Mabel saw the bird's path change toward the terrace wall. If Astra struck stone or window, fear would become injury, and injury would become blame. Mabel stepped forward before rank could stop her. Your Grace, she called. Heads turned. Mrs. Brindle made a small sound of horror behind her. The Duke did not rebuke her. He looked straight at her. Can you calm her? The question struck the lawn harder than any command. He had not ordered her to be silent. He had not ordered a servant to stand back while gentlemen failed. He had asked. Mabel's answer came from somewhere deeper than fear. Yes, Your Grace. If no one moves suddenly. Verity's face sharpened. This is absurd. She is making herself useful in the danger she made. Stand still, the Duke said. It was not clear whether he spoke to Verity or the world. Everyone obeyed. Mabel drew the cracked glove from her pocket. Several guests murmured. Pike's eyes narrowed. Astra circled again, confused by scent, sound, and too many lifted hands. Mabel moved only 2 steps from the servants' line, then stopped. She did not chase. Her father had taught her that frightened creatures were never won by pursuit. She lifted the glove and turned her body slightly away, making herself less of a challenge than a place. Astra, she said, low and steady. The Falcon crossed above her and did not descend. Mabel heard the faint whistle again, shorter now. This time she saw Pike's fingers press inside his pocket. So did the Duke. His head turned with chilling slowness. Mabel kept her eyes on the bird. No, she whispered, not to Pike, not to Verity, but to the frightened creature in the air. Not that sound. This one. She gave the old call her father had used, a soft, descending note that carried no threat. Astra's flight wavered. The bird circled once more. Mabel did not move. The lawn held its breath. Then Astra came down, not to Mabel's glove this time, but to the perch Mr. Hale had dragged closer with shaking hands. She landed hard, wings open, then folded them with offended dignity. The old call had reached her. Relief passed through Mabel so swiftly her knees nearly weakened. She lowered the glove. For one bright instant, no one spoke. Then Lady Verity pressed a hand to her heart. Your Grace, that bird flew at me. She flew away from something, the Duke said. Do not confuse the two. Verity's eyes glittered. You cannot possibly mean to defend that maid while your guests have just witnessed her influence over a dangerous animal. Mabel felt the accusation spread before Verity finished speaking. Influence. Dangerous. Maid. Each word chosen like a pin. Pike moved at once, taking the moment before the Duke could answer. Your Grace, he said, loud enough for all to hear, there is another matter. The Duke's expression hardened. Choose your next words carefully. Pike bowed, but the bow had triumph beneath it. The jeweled falcon hood from the west cabinet is missing. Mr. Hale looked up sharply. Missing? I checked before the display, thinking your Grace might wish to use it for Astra once she settled. It is gone. The guest stirred with fresh appetite. A missing jeweled hood was easier to understand than a frightened falcon. It had shape, value, scandal. Lady Verity turned slowly toward Mabel. She did not have to speak. The lawn did it for her. Eyes moved to the old glove in Mabel's hand. Then to her apron. Then to the servants behind her, already shrinking from the shadow of accusation. Mabel stood very still. She had saved the bird. That should have mattered. Instead, she felt the trap close around the shape of her kindness. The Duke looked from Pike to Mabel, and for the first time that morning, even he did not speak quickly enough to stop the murmur rising through the lawn. A maid with hidden gloves, someone whispered. An access to the muse, another voice replied. Mabel met the Duke's gaze across the bright grass. She had no proof anyone would believe. Only a black wax stain beneath a loose board, a whistle no one wished to hear, and a falcon who trusted her more than society ever would. The accusation did not fall upon Mabel all at once. It gathered first in glances, then in whispers, then in the careful withdrawal of every servant who feared the shadow might touch them too. The jeweled hood had not been named as hers, not yet, but the shape of the verdict was already forming around her. A maid had carried a hidden glove. A maid had calmed the Duke's falcon. A maid had known too much about the muse. Now something valuable had vanished from the locked cabinet, and the world of Alderwick Park preferred straight lines, even when those lines had to be drawn through an innocent woman. Mabel stood with the cracked glove against her skirt, feeling the warmth of the leather beneath her fingers. She had thought humiliation was a room she knew. She had lived in it for years. Yet this was different. This was not being overlooked, corrected, or dismissed. This was being turned into a story while still breathing. Mr. Pike let the silence mature before he spoke again. Your Grace, I regret the necessity, but if the hood is missing, the servants' rooms must be searched at once. The word stirred the guests with a thrill they did not quite conceal. Search. Theft. Servants. The morning had become a drama they could discuss over luncheon with moral concern and shining eyes. Mrs. Brindle's face stiffened. The housekeeper disliked disorder even more than she disliked scandal, and this was both. Your Grace, she said carefully, such a search may be conducted below stairs with proper witnesses. Proper witnesses, Pike repeated, his gaze on Mabel, are precisely what I require. The Duke had not moved. His stillness unsettled the lawn more than anger would have. Who last saw the hood in the cabinet? Pike bowed. I did, Your Grace. Yesterday afternoon. It was in its case. And you discovered it missing before this display? Yes, Your Grace. Yet you chose to mention it only after Ustra refused Lady Verity a second time. Pike's mouth tightened. The bird's behavior created urgency. Lady Verity pressed a hand to her breast with delicate offense. Surely Your Grace does not suggest that Mr. Pike invented the loss because a falcon behaved badly. I suggest nothing yet. The Duke looked at Mr. Hale. You will return Ustra to the Mews and remain there. No equipment is to be touched. Hale bowed with visible relief and carried the perch away. Ustra turned her hooded head as she passed Mabel, as if hearing the pulse she was trying to hide. The Duke then faced the housekeeper. Mrs. Brindle, you will conduct the search of Miss Fenwick's room with yourself, Mr. Pike, and 2 female servants as witnesses. Pike's eye sharpened with satisfaction. The Duke added, I will be present in the passage, not inside the room. No guest will enter the servants' quarters. No one will speak of guilt until something more persuasive than convenience is placed before me. Lady Verity's lips curved. How just you are, Your Grace. I try to be accurate. Mabel wished the words comforted her more. Accuracy could still destroy a person if the evidence had been planted well. The walk below stairs was worse than the walk to the Mews. Yesterday, she had carried the mystery of an old glove. Today, she carried the expectation of crime. Servants moved aside as the small party passed. Some looked frightened for her. Others looked relieved that trouble had chosen another bed. Elsie tried to follow, but Mrs. Brindle sent her away with one glance and selected 2 older maids instead, women too practical to weep and too frightened to lie openly. Mabel's room was hardly a room at all. It was a narrow attic chamber beneath the eaves, with one small window, a cot, a washstand, and a wooden trunk that had belonged to her mother. The sloped ceiling forced Pike to duck. That indignity seemed to irritate him. Mabel stood by the door with her hands folded. The Duke remained outside in the passage, visible through the opening but carefully beyond the threshold. That mattered. She did not know why she kept noticing such things. A man could ruin a woman with carelessness as easily as with intent. His restraint gave her one less wound to carry. Mrs. Brindle opened the trunk. The sound of the hinge was small and terrible. Inside lay 2 spare aprons, a mended grey dress, a shawl, a prayer book, stockings, a packet of letters tied with faded ribbon, and the ordinary poverty of a life kept neat because neatness was the last dignity allowed to it. One maid lifted the aprons. Another unfolded the shawl. Pike leaned closer. Thoroughly, he said. Mrs. Brindle's eyes flashed. I know how to inspect a trunk, Mr. Pike. Mabel almost admired her for that. Then the second maid reached beneath the prayer book and stopped. Her face changed. She drew out a small velvet case, dark green, edged in gilt. Mabel stared at it without understanding. The object seemed so foreign among her things that for one breath her mind refused it. Pike took it before Mrs. Brindle could object and opened the case with a snap. The jeweled falcon had gleamed inside, set with tiny garnets along the brow and a gold clasp no maid in England could touch without being accused of desiring the world above her. The room went very still. Mrs. Brindle's face lost colour. One of the maids whispered, "Oh, Mabel." Mabel felt the floor tilt, though she did not move. She looked at the case, then at Pike, then through the doorway to the Duke. His face had hardened, but not with triumph. Not with the simple disgust of a man whose suspicion had been rewarded. He was looking at the hood as if it had spoken too loudly. Pike turned toward the passage. Your Grace, I regret to say the matter is plain. Mabel heard herself breathe. Plain. That word again. Men like Pike loved plainness because it saved them from truth. Mrs. Brindle closed her eyes briefly. Miss Fenwick, she said, and there was sorrow beneath the discipline now, what have you to say? Mabel could have said many things. That she had never seen the case. That someone had placed it there. That Pike had known where to look before the trunk was opened. That Lady Verity's glove had blue and silver embroidery like the thread caught on the lawn. That a black wax stain lay hidden beneath a loose board near her cot. But fear sorted words cruelly. Too many explanations sounded like desperation. Too much truth sounded like invention. She looked at the jeweled hood, then lifted her chin. I did not steal it. Pike gave a soft sigh. A predictable answer. And I will not confess merely to make my betters comfortable. The word struck the little room like a dropped candle. One maid gasped. Mrs. Brindle opened her mouth, then closed it. Pike's eyes darkened. You insolent girl. The Duke stepped to the doorway. He did not cross it. You will moderate your tone. Pike bowed stiffly. Forgive me, Your Grace. But stolen property has been found in her possession. In her trunk, the Duke said. Not in her hand. Surely the distinction is not meaningful. It is meaningful to anyone interested in how it arrived there. Mabel's eyes burned, but she did not blink. She would not weep with Pike watching. The Duke looked at Mrs. Brindle. Was the trunk locked when you entered? No, Your Grace. Servants' trunks are seldom locked unless valuables are stored, and Miss Fenwick has no valuables. The sentence was not meant to wound, but it did. Pike seized the opening. Precisely. A girl with no valuables is naturally tempted by them. The Duke's gaze cut to him. Poverty is not evidence. Silence. Even Mrs. Brindle looked up at that. The Duke held out his hand. The hood. Pike hesitated before surrendering it. That hesitation was less than a second, but Mabel saw the Duke mark it. He removed the hood from the case and examined the clasp, the lining, the fine leather curve meant to cover a falcon's eyes. This is clean. Pike frowned. It is a treasured object. It would be kept clean. It has supposedly been hidden in a working maid's trunk among wool, linen, and dust. The Duke touched the underside of the clasp and drew away a thread. It was small, almost nothing. Blue and silver. Mabel's heart gave one hard beat. He saw it. He turned it against the light. Mrs. Brindle, does Miss Fenwick own anything embroidered with this thread? The housekeeper looked at Mabel's plain grey dress, her worn cuffs, her serviceable apron. No, Your Grace. Pike said quickly, thread travels. It means nothing. Perhaps. The Duke folded the thread into a handkerchief and placed the hood back in its case. Miss Fenwick will not be dismissed. Pike stared. Your Grace. She will not be sent to the magistrate on the strength of an unlocked trunk and a discovery timed for maximum convenience. Then what would Your Grace have done? Pike asked, too sharply. The Duke's voice cooled. I would have my servants remember who commands this house. Pike bowed, but anger burned through the gesture. The Duke looked at Mabel then. In the cramped little room beneath the eaves, with the proof of disgrace open before them, his attention felt almost unbearable. Miss Fenwick, until this matter is resolved, you are not to leave Alderwick Park without informing Mrs. Brindle or myself. That is for your protection, not your punishment. Mabel knew better than to accept protection without examining the chain attached to it. Still, he had not abandoned her. On that morning, beneath that accusation, it was enough to keep her standing. Yes, Your Grace. Pike snapped the velvet case shut. The sound made the maids flinch. Mabel did not. As the others filed out, she looked once at the trunk that had held her mother's shawl, her father's letters, and someone else's lie. Near the floor, beneath the cot, a corner of her hidden handkerchief showed where the loose board had shifted. Black wax waited inside it. Evidence. Danger. A voice she could not yet afford to raise. Outside in the passage, the Duke turned back once before descending the narrow stairs. I have not dismissed you, he said. The words were simple. They did not clear her name. They did not save her from whispers. But they held the door open when everyone else had already begun to close it. Mabel curtsied with her hands cold at her sides. No, Your Grace. When he left, she bent to straighten the edge of the trunk and saw, caught in the splintered wood near the hinge, one more strand of blue and silver thread. This one had not come from the hood. It had come from the hand that placed it there. By evening, Alderwick Park had dressed itself for dinner as though elegance could make suspicion respectable. Candles burned in the long dining room, throwing gold across portraits of dead vanes who stared from the walls with the permanent confidence of men never asked to prove their innocence. The table stretched beneath crystal, silver, and flowers cut from the hothouse. Every spoon lay in perfect order. Every glass shone. Every guest entered with a face arranged to suggest refinement, though the stolen hood had given them all the appetite of village gossips. Mabel stood with the other servants near the sideboard, a silver tray balanced against her hip and her eyes fixed where a servant's eyes belonged. She had sewn the second blue and silver thread inside the hem of her apron before coming upstairs. The black wax remained hidden beneath the loose board in her room. She had wanted to bring both to the Duke. She had even reached for the wax twice. But after the hood had appeared in her trunk, every movement of hers felt watched, measured, and ready to be called guilt. The Duke sat at the head of the table, composed as cut stone. The Duchess Dowager sat at his right. Lady Verity occupied a place far enough down the table to appear modest and near enough to be seen by him whenever she chose to lift her lashes. Mr. Pike was not a guest, of course. He stood near the door with the authority of a trusted steward summoned for convenience, his hands folded, his posture humble, and his expression that of a man who had buried his triumph very shallowly. Mabel served soup, then fish, then wine she did not taste and conversation she was not supposed to hear. At first, the guests behaved as if good breeding had conquered curiosity. They spoke of the roads, the opera in London, a countess's niece who had refused a baronet, and the weather turning warm before the hay was ready. Then Lord Northam said, with the false reluctance of a man offering exactly what he wished to offer, "Your Grace, I trust the matter of the missing hood has not caused distress to the household." The room softened into attention. The Duke lifted his wine glass but did not drink. The household is accustomed to useful labour, Lord Northam. Distress is generally imported by guests. The Duchess Dowager's mouth barely moved. It might have been approval. Lord Northam laughed because the alternative was embarrassment. Quite. Quite. Still, a jewelled hood is no small thing. Lady Verity set down her spoon. Nor is the safety of the guests, I fear. Mabel's hand tightened on the tray. She loosened it before the silver could tremble. Ustra's behaviour was most alarming, Verity continued. I keep thinking how fortunate it was that no lady was injured. No lady was near injury, the Duke said. Fear often enlarges distance. Verity lowered her eyes with graceful hurt. Then I am corrected again. It is a habit worth acquiring. The table paused. Mabel felt the dangerous pleasure of that sentence move through the room and then vanish beneath politeness. Lady Northam leaned forward. Still, the girl's influence over the bird is peculiar. One does not expect such skill below stairs. The Duchess Dowager looked at her. Where would you expect it? In embroidery frames. A few mouths twitched. Verity did not smile. There is skill, and then there is presumption. A servant may learn a task. She may even perform it well. But when a servant begins to imagine herself central to a noble household, disorder follows. The word servant landed near Mabel without touching her name. That made it worse. She poured wine for a gentleman who did not look at her, then stepped back. Her pulse beat beneath her collar. The Duke's gaze moved briefly in her direction, so briefly no one else could have marked it. She marked it. Miss Fenwick did not make herself central, he said. Ustra did. Birds are not judges of character, Alastair, Lady Verity said, and the use of his Christian name was soft enough to suggest intimacy. The Duchess Dowager's eye sharpened. The Duke's expression did not change. No. But they are excellent judges of hands. Verity laughed lightly. Then perhaps we should ask Ustra to settle all disputes. Marriage settlements, inheritances, thefts from locked cabinets. That would likely improve several families. This time the table did laugh, but uneasily. Verity's cheeks coloured, and Mabel saw the moment she chose to stop fencing with wit and cut directly instead. Forgive me. I only find the whole matter sad. The girl's father was involved in a similar unpleasantness, was he not? The tray in Mabel's hands became heavy enough to drag her through the floor. The room changed. Fawkes stilled. The Duke set down his glass. Careful, Lady Verity. But Verity had prepared herself too well to seem cruel. Her face softened with sorrow. I mean no unkindness. I was told Thomas Fenwick once lost a valuable falcon and left this house in disgrace. How painful that his daughter should now be found in possession of another missing object from the same muse. Mabel heard a lady murmur, "How dreadful!" Another whispered, "Blood will tell." The words did what open insult could not. They reached backward through time and struck a dead man who could not defend himself. Mabel saw her father standing beneath the mews rafters, laughing softly as a bird came down from open sky. She saw the mud on his boots the night he returned ruined. She saw her mother folding his coat after he died, smoothing the sleeve as if respect could still be pressed into cloth. Her vision blurred for one breath. Then it cleared. She stepped forward. The silver tray touched the edge of the sideboard with a sound so precise that every head turned. Mrs. Brindle, standing near the service door, went pale. Mabel curtsied. Deeply. Correctly. "Your Grace, I beg pardon for speaking out of turn." The dining room froze. Pike's face altered first. Satisfaction flared before he hid it. Verity's eyes widened with delighted disbelief, as though she had coaxed a bird into its own snare. The Duke looked at Mabel for one long second. "Speak, Miss Fenwick." A shock passed through the table. Not because a duke had spoken to a maid. That could happen. Because he had granted her the room. Verity sat straighter. "Your Grace, this is hardly suitable." "You introduced her father at my table," he said. "You may endure his daughter's answer." Mabel's throat was dry, but her voice held. "I do not ask to discuss myself, Your Grace. I ask only one question of Mr. Pike." Pike bowed with grave offense. "This is absurd." "One question," the Duke said. "Then answer it plainly." Mabel turned toward the steward. It took every lesson in dignity she possessed not to clutch her apron where the hidden thread lay. "Mr. Pike, when my trunk was searched, you said the matter was plain before the case was fully opened." Pike smiled thinly. "Because stolen property had been found." "No, sir. Before Mrs. Brindle took out the case, you were already watching the lower left side of my trunk." The room stirred. Pike's smile did not move, but the skin near his eyes tightened. "I watched the search." "You watched the place where the hood lay." A thief often imagines patterns after she is discovered. "Then here is my question." Mabel drew a breath. The entire room seemed to lean toward it. "How did you know where to look before the trunk was opened?" Silence came down at once. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of people discovering that a servant could place a blade on the table without raising her voice. Pike's expression changed so quickly most guests missed it. The Duke did not. "I did not know," Pike said. "I merely observed." "You also said the hood was missing before the second display," Mabel continued. "Yet you announced it only after Lady Verity was frightened and I had touched the glove." "Why then?" Lady Verity stood halfway from her chair. "Your Grace, this is intolerable. A maid is cross-examining your steward before your guests." "No," the Duke said. "A woman accused at my table is asking why the accusation arranged itself so conveniently." Mabel felt the words like a hand at her back, not pushing, only steadying. Pike's voice cooled. "Your Grace, I have served Housevane for many years. If my loyalty is now to be weighed against a maid with her father's history, I fear I cannot defend myself without speaking truths that may wound her." Mabel looked at him. "Truth does not wound me, sir. Lies have done worse." A small sound escaped someone near the far end of the table. The Duchess Dowager's cane tapped once beneath the cloth. "Answer the question, Mr. Pike." Pike bowed. "I checked the cabinet before the display, as I stated. I did not wish to interrupt His Grace until necessity demanded it. When the bird again behaved strangely, it became clear all irregularities should be mentioned. The answer was smooth. Too smooth. It explained everything and proved nothing. The guests relaxed because smooth explanations were easier to sit beside than uncomfortable questions. Verity sat again, her face pale with anger beneath composure. "There," she said softly. "Now the girl has had her little moment." Mabel curtsied to the Duke. Her knees felt oddly distant. "Thank you, Your Grace." Miss Fenwick, he said before she could step back. She lifted her eyes. Yes, Your Grace. Your question was properly asked. That was all. It was not acquittal. It did not remove the hood from her trunk or the stain from her name. But it turned the room toward her differently. For the first time, a few guests looked at her not as a curiosity, not as a servant overreaching, but as someone who had noticed what they had not. Mabel returned to her place near the sideboard. Mrs. Brindle did not look at her, but when Mabel reached for the tray, the housekeeper's hand brushed her sleeve. It might have been warning. It might have been comfort. Dinner resumed, though nothing truly resumed. Verity spoke little. Pike remained by the door with his head bowed and one hand closed too tightly over the other. The Duke's gaze moved once from Pike's hands to Mabel's face, and she knew he had seen the tremor she had seen. The guests ate the next course with careful manners and sharpened thoughts. Mabel served them all, silent again, but silence no longer belonged entirely to them. Beneath her apron, the blue and silver thread waited. Beneath the floorboard, the black wax waited. And somewhere beyond the dining-room walls, Ustra cried from the mews, a single bright sound that cut through the candlelit order of Alderwick Park like a witness refusing to be dismissed. Mabel was not dismissed after dinner, which made the punishment feel stranger. Dismissal would have been clean. Cruel, perhaps, but clean. Instead, she was sent back below stairs with the silver tray in her hands and every servant's eyes following her as if she had carried a candle too near gunpowder. Mrs. Brindle said nothing until the last plate had been counted, the last glass inspected, and the last footman sent away. Only then did she turn to Mabel in the stillness of the pantry. His Grace has given instructions. Mabel folded her hands. Yes, Mrs. Brindle. You are to pack what you need for several days. The words landed quietly. That made them worse. Am I to leave Alderwick Park? No, Mrs. Brindle's face tightened, not unkindly. You are to be moved to the old falconer's cottage beyond the north paddock. A footman will remain posted nearby. Her Grace the Duchess Dowager will call in the morning. His Grace says it is for your protection. Protection. Mabel had begun to distrust that word. It sounded gentle in noble mouths, but it often meant a locked door, a softened command, a decision made elsewhere and handed down with clean gloves. Does the household know this? She asked. Mrs. Brindle hesitated. That was answer enough. They will know you are removed from ordinary service until the matter is resolved. Removed. Not dismissed. Not cleared. Removed, like a stain one did not wish guests to see. Mabel curtsied because anger had nowhere proper to stand. I shall pack at once. Her attic room looked smaller when she entered it, as if the accusation had taken up space. She placed her few belongings into a worn valise, 2 aprons, 1 spare dress, her mother's shawl, the packet of letters, the cracked glove wrapped in cloth, the blue and silver thread sewn into a scrap of muslin, and the handkerchief holding the black wax from beneath the loose board. She looked once at the trunk where the jewelled hood had been found. Someone had touched her mother's shawl. Someone had lifted her prayer book. Someone had decided her poverty was a convenient drawer in which to hide a lie. Downstairs, a footman named Robert waited with a lantern and the awkward sympathy of a man who did not know whether speaking to her would make matters better or worse. He carried the valise. Mabel walked beside him through the kitchen yard and out beneath the cool night air. Alderwick Park rose behind them, windows glowing with candlelight, music faint from the drawing room where the guests were no doubt pretending the evening had recovered. Ahead, the old falconer's cottage stood near the dark line of the north paddock, low and square, with ivy clawing at the stone and one chimney leaning slightly left. Mabel had not been inside since she was a child. Her father had kept ledgers on the table there. Her mother had once hung lavender above the hearth. Now the place smelled of dust, dry wood, and shut-up memories. Robert set the valise near the door. Mrs. Brindle said you to have coal and bread in the morning. Thank you. He shifted. I don't think you stole it. The kindness struck too suddenly. Mabel looked away. You should not say that aloud. No, miss. I suppose I shouldn't. He went to stand by the path, his lantern throwing a small gold circle around his boots. The cottage door closed between them. Mabel stood alone in the room where her father's life had once made sense. For a moment, she did nothing. Then she lit the lamp, unwrapped the glove, and set it on the table. The cottage seemed to recognize it before she did. Something inside her loosened. Not enough to cry. Enough to breathe. She had just knelt to open the lower cupboard when a knock sounded at the door. Not Robert's quick tap. This was measured. Controlled. She rose carefully. "Who is it?" "Westerdale." Her hand tightened on the latch. He should not have come. Not alone. Not here. Then she saw the second shadow through the window and heard the dry tap of a cane. The Duchess Dowager had come with him. Properly done. Perfectly arranged. Still, her heart had already betrayed her by beating faster. She opened the door and curtsied. "Your Grace." "Your Grace." The Dowager entered first, wrapped in black wool, eyes taking in the room with ruthless memory. The Duke followed but remained near the hearth rather than pressing deeper into the cottage. "I wish to see that you were settled," he said. Mabel looked around the cold room, the dusty shelves, the single chair with one uneven leg. "I am settled, Your Grace." The Duchess Dowager made a sound. "That is a brave interpretation of furniture." The Duke's gaze stayed on Mabel. "You are not being punished." "No, Your Grace." "You do not sound convinced." A servant removed from the main house after being accused is seldom mistaken for honored company. The Dowager's eyes flickered. The Duke went still. "I moved you because Lady Verity and Pike will use every public room against you. In the cottage, you are beyond their immediate reach. And beyond sight. For your safety." Mabel heard the words, but she also heard the dining room. "Blood will tell." The girl has had her little moment. Would you have hidden Lady Verity in a cottage? The question left her before fear could kneel on it. The room changed. Even the lamp seemed to burn more quietly. The Duchess Dowager did not rescue him. The Duke looked at Mabel for a long moment. No, the honesty hurt more than denial would have. Mabel folded her hand so tightly her fingers ached. "Then I understand the difference. Miss Fenwick." "Your Grace, I am grateful not to be dismissed. I am grateful you did not allow Mr. Pike to take me to the magistrate on the strength of an unlocked trunk. But if I am hidden away, they will not say you protected me. They will say you were ashamed to leave me visible." He drew a slow breath. For the first time since she had met him, Alistair Vane looked less like a man certain of command than one forced to examine the cost of it. "That was not my intention." "I believe you." She raised her eyes to his. "But intention is a quiet thing. Gossip is loud." The Dowager's cane tapped once. "She is correct." The Duke's mouth tightened, not in anger at Mabel, but at himself. "I will correct it." "How?" Mabel asked. The boldness frightened her even as she spoke. "By proving the truth. Truth proved in private still leaves the lie to dine upstairs." He said nothing. That silence told her he had heard more than her words. The Dowager turned toward the door. "Alistair, I am cold, and you are learning. Both are uncomfortable. We shall continue in the morning." The Duke looked as though he wished to say more, but propriety, his mother's presence, and Mabel's exhausted dignity all stood between them. He bowed slightly. Not deeply. "Enough. Good night, Miss Fenwick." "Good night, Your Grace." After they left, Mabel stood by the closed door until the lantern light faded from the window. Then she turned back into the cottage with a strange ache beneath her ribs. She had wounded him. No. She had told him where the wound already was. There was a difference. Sleep was impossible. She banked the fire, took the lamp, and began to search the cottage not as a daughter remembering but as a woman running out of time. The cupboard held cracked dishes and mouse-chewed linen. The mantel held nothing but dust. Under the loose hearthstone, she found a rusted button and a child's marble that might once have been hers. Then she noticed the table. One leg sat newer than the others, darker at the base. Her father had always repaired objects instead of replacing them. Mabel knelt, ran her fingers beneath the table edge, and felt a small ridge where wood had been fitted over wood. Her breath caught. It took the kitchen knife from the drawer and 10 careful minutes to loosen the panel. Behind it lay a thin oilcloth packet, dry and tightly bound. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a small notebook, its cover stained with age, its first page marked in her father's precise hand. Notes on Ustra's line. Missing Falcon. Equipment irregularities. Pike present. Payments unexplained. Mabel sat back on her heels. The room seemed to tilt, not from fear this time, but from the sudden nearness of her father's voice. Page after page held dates, weather, flight distances, feed records, cabinet keys, and small observations no gossip had cared to preserve. Near the middle, one sentence had been underlined twice. The bird did not fail to return. She was called elsewhere. At the bottom of the page, in a tighter hand, was another line. Ask who paid Pike after the Harkley visit. Mabel pressed one hand over her mouth. Outside, Robert coughed softly near the path, guarding a woman society had already half condemned. Inside, the dead had begun to answer. By dawn, she would have to decide whether to wait for the Duke's protection or risk proving that her father had been right all along. Dawn came thin and grey over the north paddock, turning the cottage window into a pale square before Mabel had slept at all. The notebook lay open on the table beside the cracked glove, the black wax, and the 2 blue and silver threads. All night, her father's handwriting had kept her company with its exact dates and restrained fury. He had not written like a ruined man. He had written like a man trying to leave a lantern for someone who might one day be brave enough to follow it. Mabel copied 4 pages with a pencil so short it cramped her fingers, the missing Falcon, the altered feed entries, the note about a strange whistle heard near the West Copse, and the line that had held her still for nearly an hour. Ask who paid Pike after the Harkley visit. She folded the copies carefully, sealed them with the last scrap of plain wax from the cottage drawer, and addressed the packet to Mr. Ambrose Lyle, solicitor to the Duke of Westerdale, whose name she had once seen on estate notices. She did not address it to the Duke. That choice hurt more than it should have, but it steadied her. His Grace had power. A solicitor had records. Power could be misled by pride, caution, or rank. Records, if properly kept, had fewer manners and more memory. When Robert stirred outside the cottage path, Mabel opened the door with the packet hidden beneath her shawl. The footman straightened at once, ashamed to have been caught drowsing. Miss Fenwick, you're awake early. I never properly slept. Mrs. Brindle will send breakfast soon. Before she does, I need you to carry a note. His face tightened. I'm not meant to leave the path. Then send it with the first groom going toward the village post. It must reach Mr. Lyle today. Robert looked at the packet as if it might burn him. His Grace should see it first, shouldn't he? His Grace may see anything Mr. Lyle places before him. That is safer for all of us. He understood enough to be frightened. After a moment, he tucked the packet inside his coat. I'll find a way. Thank you. Are you going somewhere? Mabel glanced beyond him toward the low rise behind the disused mews. The morning mist still clung to the ground. Only to look for something my father may have left behind. I'm supposed to keep you here. You are supposed to keep me safe. She drew the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Today, those may not be the same thing. She did not wait for permission. If she waited, permission would have to pass through rank, propriety, and fear before it reached her. By then, the truth might be moved, burned, or buried deeper. She crossed the paddock at a steady pace, keeping to the hedge line where the grass was wet against her hem. Alderwick Park remained quiet behind her, though smoke had begun to lift from the kitchen chimneys. Ahead, the disused mews crouched near a stand of beeches, older than the main falconry yard and abandoned after the late Duke expanded the estate buildings. Mabel remembered it only in fragments, her father's hand guiding hers over a law cord, the smell of damp straw, a bird's shadow sliding over the yard. The door resisted her shoulder, then gave with a groan. Inside, the air was cold and close. Empty perches lined one wall. A cracked window admitted a blade of white light. Mabel pulled the notebook from beneath her shawl and found the page again. Old law under north stone, below split beam. She turned slowly, counting stones along the inner wall, then knelt where a roof beam had split years ago and sent a dark line across the plaster. The stone was heavy. Her fingers slipped twice before she worked it loose enough to lift. Beneath lay a shallow hollow, lined in oilcloth. Inside was an old falconer's lure, stiff with age, its leather wings folded flat and its cord wrapped around a wooden core. Mabel lifted it with both hands. On one side, nearly faded but still visible, was the mark of House Vane. On the other, pressed faintly into a strip of replaced leather, was the Hartley crest, a small crowned heron. Her breath left her. Then she saw the second object tucked beneath the cord, a sliver of polished bone, hollow through the middle. A whistle case. Not whole. Not enough alone to hang a man's guilt upon. Enough to prove the sound had existed before yesterday. Enough to prove her father had noticed it. A cry split the morning outside. Mabel froze. It came again, high and fierce, followed by a distant shout. Ustra! She wrapped the lure and whistle case in her shawl and ran from the disused mews toward the open rise. The shout came from the main yard now. A groom was calling. Another voice answered. Then bells began to ring from the stable arch, not the house bells for service, but the sharp outdoor clamour used when an animal had broken loose. Mabel reached the rise in time to see a pale shape sweep low beyond the paddock. Ustra flew free, unhooded and unsettled, veering toward the moor beyond the north boundary. Behind Mabel, a woman's voice carried from the terrace road. Lady Verity. She has taken the Falcon. The words flew faster than the bird. Mabel saw figures gathering near the house, small against the brightening morning. Verity stood with one hand lifted dramatically toward the moor. Pike was already moving toward the stables, gesturing to grooms as if command had been handed to him by God and good tailoring. Mabel did not think. She ran. The moor beyond Alderwick was not wild enough to be dangerous in daylight, but it was uneven, wet in the hollows, and broken by low stone ridges that could twist an ankle beneath long skirts. Mabel gathered her hem in one hand and held the wrapped lure in the other. Ustra circled far ahead, confused by freedom without call, wind, and perhaps that thin cruel whistle if Pike had used it again. Ustra! Mabel called, then stopped. Calling too often would make her another noise in a morning full of them. She climbed a low ridge, breath burning, and saw the falcon settle on a weathered stone about 30 yards away. The bird's wings were half spread. Her head jerked toward every sound. Mabel knelt at once, lowering herself before she came too close. There now, she said softly. I know. They are all shouting as if shouting ever brought anyone home. Ustra turned one pale eye toward her. Mabel unwrapped the cracked glove and slid it on. Her wrist ached from the old weight of it, but the leather steadied her. She took the lure and let it hang low, not swinging, only visible. Not a command, she whispered. A choice. Behind her, hoofbeats sounded. Men were coming. Too fast. Too loud. Ustra shifted, ready to launch. Mabel gave the old descending call, the one that had crossed from her father's mouth to hers like inheritance no court could seize. Ustra hesitated. The hoofbeats came closer. Mabel did not look back. Come down, proud girl, she breathed. Before fools turn fear into proof. The falcon lifted, crossed the space between them, and came down on the cracked glove with a hard, living certainty that nearly brought tears to Mabel's eyes. She rose slowly, holding Ustra steady. Only then did she turn. The Duke was the first rider over the ridge, dark coat open at the throat, face cut with something far sharper than annoyance. Relief struck him and vanished beneath control. Pike and two grooms followed close behind. Lady Verity's party remained farther back, gathering at the edge of the path like a painted audience. Miss Fenwick, the Duke said, dismounting. His voice was low. Are you hurt? Not what have you done? Not why did you run? Are you hurt? Mabel's grip tightened on the glove. No, Your Grace. Pike swung down from his horse with less grace and more triumph. Your Grace, we have plainly caught her with the bird. The Duke did not take his eyes from Mabel. Plainly is becoming your least persuasive word, Pike. She left the cottage against instruction. She came to the old mews. She holds Ustra now. Because someone released Ustra, Mabel said. And because Ustra needed a hand she trusted. Pike pointed toward the shawl bundle at her feet. Then let us see what else she came to steal. Mabel stepped slightly before it. The movement was small. The Duke saw it. So did Pike. The steward smiled. There. Caught again. The Duke moved between them before Pike could come closer. No one touches Miss Fenwick or anything in her possession without my order. Ustra clicked her beak, fierce and offended, on Mabel's glove. The moor wind lifted the edge of Mabel's shawl and revealed the old lure marked faintly with the Hartley crest. The Duke saw it. His eyes went very still. Pike saw it too, and for the first time since the accusation began, fear crossed his face before he could dress it as duty. The old lure lay at Mabel's feet like a piece of buried history dragged into daylight. For one long moment, the moor held everyone still. Ustra gripped the cracked glove, her pale breast rising and falling, while the wind moved through the coarse grass and lifted the edge of Mabel's shawl enough to show the faint Hartley crest pressed into the aged leather. Pike recovered first because guilty men often did. "Your Grace," he said, his voice smooth again, "this is worse than we feared. She has taken objects from the old muse as well as the bird." Mabel looked at him with the tired clarity of a woman who had finally heard the same lie too many times to be afraid of its shape. "I found what my father hid." "Your father," Pike said, "was dismissed in disgrace. And yet you seem very frightened of what he kept." One of the grooms shifted. The Duke raised a hand, and the movement silenced even the horses. He stood between Mabel and Pike, not so close as to crowd Ustra, but close enough that no one could mistake the line he had drawn. "Miss Fenwick is assisting my inquiry." Pike's eyes flickered. "Your Grace, she left the cottage without permission. Because evidence was in danger. She was under instruction to remain." "Under my protection," the Duke said. "Not under your command." The words carried across the rise to the little knot of guests and servants gathering near the path. Mabel saw Lady Verity in her pale morning gown, one hand at her throat, her face arranged into concern while her eyes fixed on the old lure. The sight of it troubled her. That alone gave Mabel courage. "Your Grace," Mabel said, "I copied pages from my father's notebook before I came here. I sent them to Mr. Lyle." The Duke turned to her. "My solicitor?" "Yes, Your Grace." Pike made a sharp sound. "She had no right." "No right to protect evidence?" the Duke asked. "Or no right to reach a man you could not easily frighten?" Pike flushed. "I have served House Vane for years." "Then you should have learned that service does not make truth your property." The Duke looked down at the shawl bundle. "May I see it, Miss Fenwick?" That may struck Mabel more deeply than any order would have. She knelt carefully, keeping Ustra balanced, and uncovered the old lure and broken whistle case. The notebook said to look beneath the north stone under the split beam. "My father wrote that the bird did not fail to return. She was called elsewhere." "With a whistle?" "I believe so. I heard a thin note before Ustra panicked yesterday and again this morning." Pike's smile returned, but it was strained at the edges. "A servant hears what helps her story." Mabel looked at the Duke. "So does a steward." The Duke bent and lifted the whistle case in his handkerchief. He did not touch it bare-handed. Then he examined the lure and saw what she had seen. The crowned heron, faded but unmistakable. "House Hartley," he said quietly. Lady Verity stepped forward from the path before anyone could stop her. "Your Grace, old leather can bear many marks. Surely you don't mean to attach significance to some ancient scrap?" The Duke turned. "I have not yet attached significance to anything, Lady Verity. I am collecting facts. From a maid who has lied by omission, disobeyed your instructions, and stood here with your falcon as if she owns it." Ustra clicked her beak. Mabel almost laughed from the strange pain of it. Even the bird seemed insulted. The Duke's expression cooled. "You will not refer to Miss Fenwick as though she were an object beneath discussion." Verity's face softened instantly. "I'm only trying to protect you. That task is not vacant." The blow was quiet, but everyone heard it. Verity lowered her eyes, yet Mabel saw the anger beneath her lashes. Pike saw it too. The Duke gave the lure and whistle case to one groom. "Take these to my study. Place them on my desk." Touch nothing else. Then he looked at Pike. You will return to the house with us. You will not enter the mews, the old cottage, or the servants' rooms without my permission. As your grace commands. Yes, the Duke said. As I command. The walk back to Alderwick Park was not triumphant. Mabel knew better than to mistake attention for vindication. She carried Ustra on the old glove while Mr. Hale hurried from the mews to meet them, pale with worry and relief. The guests watched from the terrace and the path, whispering behind gloves and canes. Yesterday, their stares had made Mabel feel exposed. Today, they made her feel tired. A person could be innocent and still be consumed by the effort of standing upright beneath suspicion. At the falconry yard, Ustra stepped to the perch with reluctant dignity, and Mabel finally lowered her aching arm. The Duke remained beside her until the bird was settled. Then he said, low enough that only she and perhaps the nearest groom could hear, "You should have shown me the notebook before going alone." Mabel kept her eyes on Ustra. "Would you have let me go?" He did not answer quickly. She turned to him then. "That is why I did not ask." His face tightened, not with anger. With recognition. "I made it difficult for you to trust me. You made it safe for me to breathe and unsafe for me to be seen." The words were too honest. Once spoken, they could not return. The Duke looked toward the main house, where Verity had already begun speaking softly to Lady Northam, her hands moving with injured elegance. "I thought if I removed you from the room where they could strike, I had protected you. Your Grace, a woman can be ruined in a room she is not allowed to enter." The silence between them changed. Something proud in him bent, not broken, but willingly lowered. "You are right." Mabel had expected defense. She had braced for it. The plainness of his admission left her unsteady. "I should have stood beside you in public from the moment Ustra chose your hand," he said. His gaze dropped to the cracked glove. He touched only the edge of the leather, barely enough to move it. "I mistook shelter for respect. I will not do so again." Mabel's fingers closed lightly inside the glove. "I do not wish to be the rescued maid in a story told for your honor." "What do you wish?" "My father's name entered correctly in the estate record." She lifted her chin. "And mine left out of lies." "Then that is where we begin." Before she could answer, Robert came running from the stable arch, breathless, his livery crooked with haste. "Your Grace. Mr. Lyle has arrived from the village road. He says he received Miss Fenwick's packet from a groom and came at once. He is in your study." The Duke looked at Mabel, and for the first time that day something like grim satisfaction touched his eyes. "Come." The study smelled of paper, old leather, and rain through an open window. Mr. Ambrose Lyle was a narrow man with spectacles, grey whiskers, and the air of someone who trusted ink more than charm. He bowed to the Duke, then to the Duchess Dowager, who had appeared as if summoned by scandal itself. His bow to Mabel was smaller, but real. "Miss Fenwick, your copies were most useful." Pike stood near the door under the Duke's order, his face pale with controlled fury. Verity was not present, but Mabel felt her absence like a held breath. Mr. Lyle opened a ledger and placed one copied page beside it. The late Thomas Fenwick's notes correspond to irregularities in the estate accounts from 8 years ago. Payments were entered under repairs to the West Mews, but the sums were diverted. The initials beside 3 receipts are OP. Pike's voice was stiff. "Old accounts are easily misunderstood." "Indeed," Mr. Lyle said. "That is why I brought the originals." The room went very quiet. The Duke looked at Pike. "You will say nothing further until I ask it." Pike bowed once, and for the first time, his bow looked like fear. Mr. Lyle continued, "There is also a payment recorded from an agent connected to House Hartley within the same month as the missing Falcon." The Duchess Dowager's cane struck the carpet once. At last. A scandal with handwriting. Mabel should have felt victory. Instead, she felt the awful weight of nearing truth. The Duke turned to her. "Miss Fenwick, I intend to place this before every person who has heard you accused." "At dinner?" she asked. No, his voice hardened. "In the place where they first chose to see you falsely." At that moment, the study door opened after a sharp knock, and a footman entered with a folded note on a salver. From Lady Verity Harkley, Your Grace. The Duke took it, read it once, and passed it to his mother. Her mouth curved without warmth. She requests all guests attend the falconry yard tomorrow morning to clear the matter once and for all. Mabel felt Austra's weight again in memory, fierce and living on her hand. The Duke looked at the note, then at the evidence spread across his desk. Then tomorrow, he said, we shall oblige her. Morning came to Alderwick Park with the sharp brightness of a day that had decided to expose everything placed beneath it. By 10 o'clock, the falconry yard had been swept clean, the perches set in a line, and a half-circle of chairs arranged for the guests who had suddenly discovered a deep concern for justice. They came wrapped in walking shawls and polished concern, ladies with gloved hands folded in their laps, gentlemen with hats tucked beneath their arms, all of them pretending this gathering was regrettable while taking their places early enough not to miss a word. The servants stood behind them in a quieter row, uncertain whether they were witnesses, warnings, or future examples. Mabel stood near the old stone wall with the cracked glove held in both hands. She had not worn it yet. The leather rested against her palms like a living memory, and though every eye in the yard returned to it again and again, she refused to hide it. Hiding had protected nothing. Hiding had allowed lies to dine in bright rooms while truth waited outside the door. The Duke stood several yards away with Mr. Lyle beside him, a stack of ledgers and folded papers arranged on a plain table. The Duchess Dowager sat nearby, her cane upright between her gloved hands. A local magistrate, Mr. Kelton of the village, had arrived at his Grace's request and positioned himself with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that a duke's yard was not a court, but that evidence heard before witnesses could become difficult to bury. Pike stood to the left of the table. He had dressed with particular care, which made his pallor more visible. Lady Verity Harkley arrived last. That was deliberate. She entered the yard as if every stone had been placed for her passage, her pale gown unwrinkled, her blue and silver embroidery bright at the cuffs. A soft murmur followed her. She let it rise, then lowered her lashes. Your Grace, she said, I am grateful you agreed to clarify this distressing affair. The Duke did not bow. You requested witnesses. I have provided them. Her smile trembled just enough to seem wounded. I requested truth. Then you chose an excellent day to meet it. The Duchess Dowager's mouth tightened with approval. Mabel kept her gaze forward. She would not look down. Not today. Verity turned slightly, allowing the assembled guests to see her profile, pale and noble and wronged. I should like to say at once that I bear Miss Fenwick no malice. If she has been misled by old resentment, grief, or ambition, I pity her. But His Grace's Falcon has twice been unsettled in her presence. A jewelled hood was found in her trunk. She left the cottage after being placed there for everyone's safety. Then she was discovered on the moor holding Ustra and carrying objects taken from the old mews. I ask only whether we are all expected to pretend these facts mean nothing. The guests stirred. Facts, when arranged by a clever woman, could wear the clothing of truth. Mabel felt the old instinct to shrink. Then she remembered the Duke's words in the yard. I should have stood beside you in public. She lifted her chin. The Duke spoke before any whisper could grow. No one here will be asked to pretend anything. Nor will anyone here be permitted to insult Miss Fenwick before evidence is heard. Any person unable to master that discipline may leave Alderwick Park before luncheon. Chairs creaked. No one moved. Lady Verity's smile thinned. Pike stepped forward with a bow. Your Grace, may I answer what has been implied against me? You may answer when asked. Pike's lips pressed together. The Duke looked to Mabel. Miss Fenwick, you wish to describe what was done to Ustra. Mabel's heart beat once, painfully. Every servant in the row behind her seemed to stop breathing. She stepped forward, not behind the Duke, not beside him as an equal in rank, but into the open space where all could see her face. That was enough. A falcon does not refuse every hand without reason, she said. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt. On the first morning, Ustra's right jess was twisted and cut. It rubbed when she rose. Pain taught her not to trust the call. On the second morning, the jess had been replaced, but I heard a whistle. Thin. Very high. Most people would not notice it, but a trained bird would. Verity gave a soft laugh. How fortunate that only Miss Fenwick can hear invisible evidence. Mabel turned toward her. I am not the only one who noticed Astra answer it. She looked at the Duke. He did not rescue her with speech. He simply met her gaze and inclined his head once. Permission. Witness. Not ownership. Mabel continued. When the whistle sounded, Astra veered away from your glove, my lady. Not toward it. Away. Verity's color shifted. The bird flew at me. No, Mabel said. She fled from what she had been taught to fear. A murmur passed through the servants. Pike seized it. Your Grace, this is sentiment dressed as expertise. A maid cannot expect to instruct this company in falconry because her father once held a place here. Mabel faced him. The words had waited in her for years. I am Thomas Fenwick's daughter. Silence came down so quickly that even Verity went still. If that name was used to shame me, then it may also be used to hear me. My father kept records. He noted weather, flight distances, feed, equipment, and irregular handling. He wrote that the missing Falcon did not fail to return. She was called elsewhere. He wrote of a whistle near the West Copse. He wrote of payments he could not explain. Pike's hands closed. A dead man's notebook proves nothing. No, Mabel said. But it asks questions you have spent 8 years avoiding. The Duchess Dowager's cane tapped once. Well said. Verity stood. This has gone far enough. Your Grace, surely you cannot mean to let a servant accuse respectable people on the strength of childish memories and bird calls. The Duke turned his head. Sit down, Lady Verity. Her eyes widened. The command was not loud. It was worse. It was final. She sat, slowly, with her pride trembling beneath the surface. Mr. Lyle opened the first ledger. The notebook sent by Miss Fenwick corresponds with several entries from the estate accounts in the year of Thomas Fenwick's dismissal. The entries concern repairs to the Old West Mews. The sums were authorized under Mr. Pike's initials. Pike bowed stiffly. Repairs were needed. Yet the repairs were never completed, Mr. Lyle said. And the money appears again, in reduced form, through a London agent connected to House Harclay. Verity's hand moved to her cuff. Mabel saw it. So did the Duke. Mr. Lyle placed the old lure on the table. This was found by Miss Fenwick beneath the north stone of the disused mews, exactly where her father's notebook indicated. It bears House Vane's mark, as expected. It also bears, on a replaced leather strip, the Harclay crest. The magistrate leaned forward. Guests whispered openly now. Verity rose again, no longer able to remain graceful in stillness. Old leather, old ledgers, old gossip. This is absurd. His Grace is being made ridiculous before his guests because a maid wants revenge for her father. Mabel felt the blow. Then she felt it fail. Revenge would have been easier than truth. Revenge burned hot. Truth required standing still while people tried to make your dignity look like insolence. I want the record corrected, Mabel said. That is all. The Duke's eyes moved to her, and something changed in them, not soft enough for the room to name, but deep enough for Mabel to feel. Pike stepped forward, desperation sharpening him. Your Grace, I must protest. This girl has influenced the bird from the beginning. She carried a glove in secret. She had knowledge no housemaid should possess. She has made herself central through tricks and sympathy. And the hood? The Duke asked. Pike stopped. What of it? How did it enter her trunk? She placed it there. With what key did she enter the locked cabinet? Pike's mouth opened, then closed. A stolen key, perhaps. From whom? The silence grew. The Duke looked toward Mabel. Miss Fenwick, the cracked glove. Mabel understood without being told. Her hand trembled only once as she put it on. Mr. Hale brought Astra from the mews, hooded and restless. The yard shifted with fearful fascination. Mabel raised the glove, not high, not theatrically, only steady. A falcon remembers the hand that never harmed her, she said. The words were for her father. For Astra. Perhaps for herself. Then Mr. Hale lifted the hood from Ustra's head, and every face in the yard turned upward, waiting to see what truth a bird might dare to choose. Ustra did not fly at once. She stood on Mr. Hale's glove with the stillness of a creature who understood that the yard had become a snare made of breath, silk, and waiting eyes. Her pale head turned once toward the guests, then toward Pike, then toward Lady Verity, whose face had gone so composed that it looked less like calm than porcelain fired too hard. Mabel held the cracked glove steady. Her arm remembered the weight before the bird came. Her heart remembered it too. "No one moves," the Duke said. The command passed over the yard and pinned every rustle in place. Mr. Hale loosened the jess. For a moment, Ustra only watched. Then she lifted from his glove with one powerful sweep, rose above the table where ledgers and old leather lay exposed, and circled the yard in widening silence. She passed over Lady Verity's blue and silver cuffs. Verity lifted one hand before she could stop herself, half invitation and half reflex. Ustra did not descend. She passed over Pike, who flinched as if the bird carried judgment in her shadow. She passed over the guests who had whispered thief, ambition, blood will tell, and servant's trick. Then she came down on Mabel's glove with such fierce certainty that the old leather creaked beneath her talons. A sound moved through the yard. Not applause. Not admiration. Something deeper and more ashamed. Recognition. Mabel's knees threatened to fail, but she held. Ustra settled and gave one sharp cry, as if the choice had been obvious from the beginning and the humans had wasted 2 days learning it. The Duke turned to the assembly. "Let the record of this morning begin there." Lady Verity rose. "A bird cannot clear a theft." "No," the Duke said. "But she can prove where fear was taught and where trust survived. Now we shall discuss theft." Mr. Lyle opened the ledger again. The jeweled hood found in Miss Fenwick's trunk was kept in the locked west cabinet. There are 2 keys recorded. One held by Mr. Hale, who was with stable hands during the interval in question. One held by Mr. Pike. Pike's face tightened. "Keys may be copied." "Indeed," Mr. Lyle said. "Which is why His Grace ordered the cabinet examined. Wax residue was found near the lock plate. Miss Fenwick also preserved black wax from a strip of cloth taken near the stable pump. It matches the sealing wax in Mr. Pike's desk drawer." Pike laughed once. "This is nonsense." Mabel felt Ustra's shift beneath her hand. She steadied the bird with her voice. "Easy." The Duke looked at Pike. "You will be still." The words were not loud, but they stripped the steward of movement. Mr. Lyle continued. "A blue and silver thread was found on the hood clasp. Another was found in the hinge of Miss Fenwick's trunk, where the object appears to have been placed. Miss Fenwick preserved the second thread. The embroidery corresponds with Lady Verity Harcley's gloves worn during the second display. Verity's hand closed over her cuff. Too late. Every eye followed. "Many women wear blue," she said. "Few wore that thread while arguing Miss Fenwick had influenced the Falcon," the Duchess Dowager replied. "Fewer still had reason to ensure a maid looked guilty before my son looked too closely at House Harclay." The magistrate leaned forward. "Mr. Lyle, the payments." Mr. Lyle placed 3 receipts on the table. 8 years ago, payments entered as West Mews repairs were diverted under Mr. Pike's initials. Within the same month, a London agent acting for House Harclay recorded a matching private disbursement. Thomas Fenwick noted irregularities, a strange whistle, and the missing Falcon being called elsewhere. He hid the lure found yesterday beneath the north stone of the old mews. The Duke lifted the lure by its cord. This bears the Harclay crest on a replaced leather strip. Verity's composure cracked at the edges. "My family's crest may appear on many things. We have given gifts to half the county." "Did you give this to Mr. Pike?" the Duke asked. "Certainly not." Pike spoke at once. "Your Grace, I never received such a thing." The Duke's eyes moved between them. "Interesting." "I did not ask you." Silence struck harder than any accusation. Pike's jaw worked. Verity drew herself up. "This is persecution. You are allowing a servant and an old scandal to humiliate a lady of birth." Mabel looked at her then, truly looked. Not upward as a maid to a lady. not downward in resentment. Straight across the space where lies had tried to place them. No, my lady. I am asking why my father's name had to be ruined for your family's debt to be hidden. Verity's lips parted. It was only a breath, but truth sometimes entered through the smallest opening. You don't know what our debts were. The yard went dead quiet. Her own words reached her a heartbeat late. Colour drained from her face. The Duke stepped forward. No one mentioned debt. Verity looked at Pike. Pike looked away. That was the moment the story changed shape before everyone. It ceased to be a maid's ambition. It ceased to be a bird's odd preference. It became what it had always been, a gentleman's servant silenced, a steward paid, a noble family protected, and a daughter made small enough to carry the blame. The magistrate rose. Mr. Pike, I will require you to accompany me and answer further questions regarding theft, fraud, and the removal of estate property. Pike's dignity collapsed into outrage. Your Grace, after all my years of service. The Duke's face was colder than winter stone. After all your years of service, you knew precisely how to betray it. Pike turned toward Verity, but she had already stepped back, as if distance could erase partnership. The Duke then faced her. Lady Verity Harkley, you and your party will leave Alderwick Park before nightfall. House Vane withdraws every understanding, every invitation, and every courtesy extended toward your family until this matter is examined in full. Verity's eyes shone, but not with tears of repentance. You would cast off a lady for a maid. The Duke turned slightly, enough that the whole yard could see Mabel standing with Astra on the cracked glove. I would cast off Fossard for truth. Rank does not alter the direction of that choice. No one spoke. The word settled into the walls, the perches, the servants' row, the guests' lowered eyes. Then the Duke approached Mabel. Slowly. Publicly. He stopped at the proper distance, as he had the first day, close enough to honour her and far enough not to claim what had not been offered. Miss Fenwick, he said, Thomas Fenwick was dismissed from this house under a lie. By my authority as Duke of Westerdale, his name will be restored in the estate record today. The accusation attached to him will be struck out. His service will be entered as honourable. Mabel's breath broke despite all her effort to keep it whole. Astra shifted, but did not leave. Thank you, Your Grace. No, his voice changed. Not softer exactly. True. It should not require thanks to return what was stolen. The Duchess Dowager rose. Every servant straightened. Every guest seemed to remember posture. Let all here understand, she said, Miss Fenwick did not bring disgrace into Alderwick Park. She revealed where it had been hiding. Mabel bowed her head because pride, grief, and relief had become too heavy to hold at once. The Duke looked at the old glove, then at Astra, then at Mabel's face. The first honest hand in this yard belonged to Miss Fenwick. The sentence did what no applause could have done. It made the whispering guests lower their eyes. It made Mrs. Brindle press one hand to her mouth. It made Will, the stable boy, smile openly through tears he tried to hide. Mabel looked at the glove that had once been too large for her, the glove her father had worn before society made him a cautionary tale. It no longer felt like a relic of ruin. It felt like a witness who had waited long enough. May I, the Duke asked, extending his own gloved hand toward Astra. Mabel understood the question beneath the question. Not may I take the bird. May I share the trust? She gave the old falconer's call, low and steady. Astra lifted from her glove, crossed the short space, and landed on the Duke's hand. The yard exhaled. Not because the Duke had reclaimed his falcon, but because the falcon had gone only when Mabel permitted it. Trust had moved through her, not around her. When the witnesses began to disperse, they did so differently than they had arrived. The guests no longer looked at Mabel as a spectacle. The servants no longer looked at her as a danger. Pike was led away by the magistrate. Verity left with her chin high and her future visibly lowered. At last, the yard thinned until only the Duke, the Duchess Dowager, Mr. Hale, and Mabel remained near the perch. The Duke returned Astra to Mr. Hale and faced Mabel again. You are free to leave Alderwick if you wish, he said. You should never have been made to feel otherwise. Mabel looked toward the old muse, then toward the great house that had hidden and revealed so much. "And if I stay? Then it will be because you choose it. Not because I sheltered you. Not because anyone placed you where they preferred not to see you." His eyes held hers. "And if you allow it, I would like to stand beside you while the record is corrected." Mabel held the cracked glove against her heart. For the first time in years, the name Fenwick did not feel like a burden she carried alone. "Then stand where they can see you, Your Grace," she said. The Duke bowed his head. "I will." 3 months after the Yard of Witnesses, the Westerdale mews no longer smelled of dust, suspicion, and old injury. It smelled of oiled leather, fresh straw, cut heather, and morning air moving cleanly through newly repaired windows. The broken perches had been replaced. The old west cabinet had been refitted with new locks. A polished board hung beside the inner door, and on it, written in firm black lettering beneath the names of honoured falconers who had served House Vane, was the name Thomas Fenwick. Honourable Service. Record restored by order of His Grace, Alistair Vane, Duke of Westerdale. Mabel had read the words so many times that she no longer needed to look at them to know their shape, yet she looked anyway. Some wounds did not vanish because justice came. They changed texture. They became scars one could touch without bleeding. That morning, she stood in a dark green walking dress the Duchess Dowager had insisted was practical, respectable, and not so plain as to insult the living. The choice had made Mabel smile, though she had tried to hide it. She was not a maid now. Her resignation from domestic service had been entered properly, without bitterness from Mrs. Brindle, who had folded Mabel's last apron herself and said, in a voice brisk with threatened emotion, "You wore it honourably. That is more than many ladies do with silk." The Fenwick Falconry Trust had been established through Mr. Lyle's careful hand, funded by estate monies recovered from Pike's fraud and an endowment from House Vane that Mabel had accepted only after the solicitor proved it could not be withdrawn by anyone's whim, not even a duke's. Its purpose was simple, to preserve the mews, train proper handlers, and keep Thomas Fenwick's methods from being buried again beneath pride. Will had become her first pupil. He still wrapped his hands badly. He also listened better than most gentlemen. "Hold steady," Mabel told him now as Ustra watched from the perch with imperial doubt. Will extended his gloved hand and tried not to tremble. "I'm holding steady." "You are holding your breath." "That's different." "To a falcon, it is not." He exhaled too suddenly. Ustra turned her head away, offended. From the doorway, the Duchess Dowager's cane tapped once. "The bird has standards." "I approve." Will flushed crimson. Mabel curtsied, though the Dowager had told her twice that such severity was no longer necessary every time the old lady entered the mews. Habit, unlike shame, was slow to depart. "Good morning, Your Grace." "It remains undecided. Alistair has received another letter from Lady Verity's aunt insisting her niece has retired to the continent for her health. Apparently disgrace becomes much healthier when it crosses water." Will made a strangled sound and pretended to cough into his sleeve. Mabel kept her face composed. "I hope Lady Verity finds the distance improving." "You are kinder than I am." "No, Your Grace. I am only finished with her." The Dowager looked at her for a moment, then nodded as if that answer pleased her more than hatred would have. Verity had left Yorkshire before sunset on the day of the inquiry, her family's hopes of a match with Westerdale carried out with her luggage. Pike had not departed so elegantly. The magistrate had taken him first to answer for the stolen hood, then for forged accounts, diverted funds, and the sale of estate birds through agents who had thought noble negligence would protect them. What punishment awaited him was no longer Mabel's daily burden. It was enough that he could not stand in doorways behind frightened servants again. It was enough that Thomas Fenwick's name had outlived his lies. The Dowager moved farther into the mews and lowered herself onto the chair placed for her use. "Alistair is late." Mabel checked the small clock above the tack shelf. "By 4 minutes. For my son, that is practically dissipation." Will laughed before remembering he was in the presence of a duchess. The Dowager ignored it with visible mercy. A moment later, the Duke entered without ceremony, though no man of his rank ever truly entered without effect. The room seemed to gather itself around him. He wore a dark riding coat and carried his gloves in one hand. Mabel felt the old awareness stir, no longer fear, not quite ease, but something warm and dangerous in its quietness. Their courtship had been proper in every visible way. He called with his mother present. He walked with Mabel in the falconry yard while servants, pupils, and sometimes half the household remained within sight. He never asked for gratitude. He never turned the restoration of her father's name into a debt. That, more than any tenderness, had been the thing that wore down her caution. A man who could have claimed credit and did not was more unsettling than a man who offered compliments. "Miss Fenwick," he said. "Your Grace. Will appears alive. Astra is considering whether he deserves to remain so. Then he is improving." Will grinned, and the Duke's mouth almost smiled. Almost. It was enough. The morning lesson continued for another 20 minutes, until Astra finally permitted Will to hold her for the length of 5 steady breaths. To a guest, it would have looked small. To Mabel, it was a beginning. When Will was sent to clean the spare gloves, the Dowager rose with theatrical difficulty and announced that she had forgotten to inspect the new feed ledger, though it lay on the table beside her. "Alastair, do not say anything foolish while I am 6 yards away. I shall attempt restraint." Attempt success. She took herself just beyond the open door, close enough for propriety, far enough for privacy to breathe. Mabel looked down at the cracked glove, now mounted in a shallow glass-fronted case beside her father's record board. Next to it hung a new glove made to fit her hand, strong and supple, with MF stitched inside the cuff. The sight of both together still moved her. Past and future. Not one replacing the other. The Duke came to stand beside her, leaving the proper distance between them. "I spoke with Lyle this morning. The trust papers are complete. The income is yours to administer. If you ever choose to leave Alderwick, the work follows you. No one here can take it back." Mabel turned to him. "Not even you. Especially not me." The answer was immediate. Her chest tightened. "You have been very careful to make certain I owe you nothing." "Yes." "Why?" His gaze moved to the old glove, then back to her face. "Because I want to know what you would choose if need was no longer standing behind you with a hand on your shoulder." For a long moment, the muse held only the sound of birds shifting, leather creaking softly, and the Dowager turning pages outside with exaggerated patience. Mabel had imagined this question in many forms. She had feared it would come dressed as charity, rescue, or noble condescension. It came instead as freedom. That made it harder to answer lightly. "And what is it you are asking me to choose, Your Grace?" He drew a breath, and she saw that his composure had limits after all. "Not Westerdale. Not title. Not shelter. Me, if I have earned the right to ask. And only if you can say no without losing a single thing I have promised." Mabel's eyes stung. She did not look away. "You are asking very plainly for a duke. I have discovered plainness is useful when one has spent too long hiding behind rank. And if I say yes, then I will court you openly until even the dullest person in Yorkshire understands I am not elevating a curiosity, rewarding a servant, or repairing a scandal. I am asking to stand beside the woman who taught this house the difference between possession and trust." From the doorway, the Dowager said, "That was not foolish." Mabel laughed then, softly and helplessly, and the sound seemed to surprise Astra into looking at her. The Duke did not smile fully, but his eyes changed. Mabel reached for the new glove and slipped it over her hand. "Then yes," she said. "But not because you restored my father's name. No, not because you protected me. No, because when you were wrong, you learned." His voice lowered. "I will keep learning. See that you do." The Dowager's cane tapped approval before Mabel could decide whether she had spoken too boldly. Outside, the yard had filled with morning light. Astra lifted from her perch with Mabel's call, crossed the small space, and landed on the new glove as if it had always belonged there. Mabel stood steady beneath the weight. The Duke remained beside her, not claiming the bird, not claiming the moment, only present within it. After a breath, Astra turned her head toward him, considering. Mabel gave the quiet signal. The Falcon stepped from her glove to his, calm and certain, then back again to hers. Trust moved between them without force. The old cracked glove watched from its place of honor on the wall. Beneath it, Thomas Fenwick's restored name caught the light. And in the mews where a maid had once been accused, Mabel Fenwick stood seen, free, and chosen, with the whole house at last learning how gently truth could land when given a hand worthy of holding it.